Okay, we've just gone one, so I'm going to make a start and welcome you to this afternoon's webinar about careers for English graduates. So my name's Kathy Schrank. I'm from the School of English at the University of Sheffield, and together with Dr. Archie Cornish, also from Sheffield, and Kate de Raker from the School of English at Newcastle University, I'm part of the team who's been putting this event together. And we're very grateful to the English Association for collaborating with us and hosting this event today, to the Arts and Humanities Research Council for funding the project that today's event grows out of, to all our speakers this afternoon, and to people, including our university's careers services, who put together some additional resources that we will be sharing with you after the event. And of course, we're very grateful to all of you for coming along today. So today's project has a slightly unlikely origin. For the past 7 or so years, Kate and I have been part of a team of researchers funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, who've been putting together an edition of the works of the Elizabethan writer Thomas Nashe, who's a near contemporary of William Shakespeare, but who, unlike Shakespeare, isn't much known now, let alone read outside academic circles. Nashe's generation received an education which instilled in them the practical value of what they learned and the need, when they finished their formal education, to go on and use that learning in service of the state. And they were also brought up to believe that their education would secure them the kind of important, secure jobs that would enable them to fulfill this destiny. However, when they left university in the 1580s and 1590s, it was to an absolute dearth of such jobs. And as a result, there was a generation of highly skilled, highly literate graduates who needed to find a way of making a living in an employment landscape which was changing rapidly. And many, like Nashe, turned to their pens, so they wrote for the printing press and for the burgeoning theatre industry, until plague came along and closed down the playhouses and shut off that stream of income for a good few years. And so the resonances with the early 2020s are quite striking, even before we get to the death of a long-lived monarch called Elizabeth. And these resonances between Nashe's world and our own have been the focus of the spin-off project that Kate, Archie and I have been involved in, which uses Nashe's work, Piers Penniless, to think about the concept of precarity in historical perspective. So we've been working with student interns to record how school leavers and students perceive and experience the world of work, and with creative practitioners, an artist, a theatre company, to respond to Nashe's text. And this Nashe's text, Piers Penniless, is on some levels the angry, frustrated cry of a freelancer who's railing against a world which fails to appreciate his talents. And you can find out more about this Penniless project via the Thomas Nashe Project website that's hosted by Newcastle University. The story of Nashe's generation isn't all doom and gloom, though. That generation provide examples of people thinking flexibly about their careers, people who network effectively and who recognise and value the skills that they've acquired through their education, skills that they're then very good at marketing to potential employers. And those attributes are equally valuable today, and they're going to be something that we'll hear much more about as the afternoon proceeds. So I'm just going to sketch out now how the afternoon's going to work. So we've got 3 sessions, the first of which will begin very shortly, looks at the concept of a career in the 21st century. The second looks at careers that English students often aspire to, but which can be difficult to get into because they're highly competitive and often require having the financial cushion that allows you to take on low-paid, insecure jobs or even unpaid internships in order to gain the experience and get your foot in at the door. And in that session, we'll hear from former students from Newcastle and Sheffield talking about their work in the creative arts, in journalism and in the charity sector. And the third session looks at less obvious careers for English students, but how English graduates can thrive in jobs in finance and in STEM, so there's sort of science and tech, engineering, maths, including artificial intelligence, a field that's actually hungry for humanities graduates. And again, that session is going to feature former students from Newcastle and Sheffield. After each session, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions, so please do put your questions in the chat as you think of them, and each session will have a facilitator who will be responsible for keeping an eye on the chat and filtering through your questions. Because of the size of the call, your mics are automatically on mute, so you'll have to use the chat function to ask your questions. At the very end of the day, we'll have a quick roundup and there'll be a further opportunity for comment and reflection. So again, please do share any general reflections, comments in the chat as well. Please stay in the meeting during the breaks, otherwise sort of the host will have to kind of keep admitting people after each break. During those breaks, we will have other speakers joining us. So if you don't want to hear the behind the scenes stuff, then mute your speakers during the breaks. Otherwise, you might well be subjected to a degree of panic as in case people are having the inevitable trouble joining. Do bear with us if there are any technical hitches. It's amazing sort of how quickly we can forget how to use the kind of world of Zoom after having spent much of our lives in it during lockdowns, but I'm certainly a little bit rusty. And internets have variable quality as well. The event is being recorded. It's going to be made available on the English Association website after the event, along with some additional resources that we've collected, including some Q&As with some alumni who couldn't come along today but wanted to contribute. So I hope you all enjoy the afternoon and find it useful. And now I'm going to hand over to Archie to start off the first session.
Thanks, Kathy, and I'll just echo your thanks to the English Association, to all our speakers, and to everyone in our audience. So as you can see from the programme, we're going to hear in the second and third sessions today about specific careers, some of them quote unquote classic careers that English graduates will go into, and some of them much less expected. But to anchor our discussion, we thought we'd start by thinking a bit more generally about careers, about the humanities, and about the relation between English and employability. And our first speaker this afternoon is Dr. Kate Daubeny. Kate is Director of the Careers Group at the University of London and author of the recent book, Careers Education to Demystify Employability, and is going to talk to us this afternoon about careers and the humanities. So over to you, Kate.
Thank you very much. I'll just get into the action of sharing my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that. Archie, you can see that okay? There's one nice big screen there. Fabulous. Yes, thank you very much. It's a great privilege to be here. And as Archie says, I'm Kate Daubeny. I'm the Director of the Careers Group, which is a federation of university careers services of some of the London universities. And I too am a humanities graduate. My PhD was in film music, and I was an academic for 7 years before moving into careers education about 20 years ago. So I'm going to take you on a short journey today, drawing on different narratives to reimagine the workplace through the lens of English, the humanities, and employability. And some of the narratives we're going to look at today, ones that you craft yourself, and others are narratives that you have to navigate and interpret. But I want to start with what I hope is a fairly universal truth for all of you, which is that you love your subject. Or as Thomas Nash might have put it, I serve because I love. I think our identities are strongly influenced by our relationships with things that we enjoy. And if we go into higher education, as you have done, then that relationship between subject and identity can become quite central. So when we then encounter narratives that put that love of subject at risk, perhaps by suggesting that its value to you is not the same as its value in the employment market or to society or even to government, that can actually make us feel pretty vulnerable and quite confused and possibly quite concerned. So I want to propose some ways to manage the tension between those narratives today that should reassure you that the love of subject that you value now will continue to offer you value throughout your working lives, whatever form they take. So one way to think about this tension between narratives is to consider the difference between what Deci and Ryan called intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. A good way to think about intrinsic motivation is to recall a time when you chose to do something because you really loved doing it. Because intrinsic motivation occurs when something is inherently interesting and enjoyable. And one of the benefits of being intrinsically motivated is that you end up having really high quality learning experiences that are characterized by the freedom and autonomy to be creative and to determine for yourself the benefit and enjoyment that you get out of doing things. And obviously, when we study, we have to meet the requirements of our course. But this is often a reason that people choose subjects they love when they think about their choice of degree, because it's much easier to stick at something if you know you love it. So this might well describe how you're feeling right now. By contrast, extrinsic motivation describes situations where you do something or you choose to do something while recognizing that it leads to an outcome that has a value to someone or something else. It has an outcome that's valued outside your own value system. Now, you might recognize or share that value, but the choice to do that action doesn't come from you, but from an expectation on you. And that might be sitting the exam to get a good grade. So separable outcomes can be positive. For example, I want to find ways to demonstrate how much I love this subject that I find valuable too. Or it can be negative. I need to get good grades in this subject so that I don't have to go and study another subject at university instead. And we can describe this as being a choice between choice and compliance. And the reality is that as for future you, when you go into the workplace, unless it's to work at something that intrinsically motivates you, extrinsic motivations can become much more visible and prevalent the longer that we spend in the workplace. So one of the fears that we often have when we've really loved our degree subject, but can't necessarily see where it's actually leading, or we feel that it isn't valued in other environments, is that we're going to lose all that intrinsic motivation that we built up during our subject. Now, for English and humanities students and graduates, that can often feel like our intrinsic motivation is shrinking as we leave university and the extrinsic motivations of the workplace are growing. And so intrinsic engagement therefore can feel quite precarious. As Thomas Nash might put it, beauty is but a flower which wrinkles will devour. In other words, that intrinsic love affair that we have with our subject might actually completely wilt under the pressure of the external environment. But Nash also said that our learning ought to be our lives' amendment, and the fruits of our private study ought to appear in our public behaviour. In other words, intrinsic and extrinsic motivations ought not to be mutually exclusive. What we study that is personal to us should absolutely show up in our public lives, which now are principally our working identities. And all the value of our intrinsically motivated degree subject love affair ought to be continuously present in everything that's going to come later. Or if you want to be pragmatic about it, you want to feel confident that your considerable investment of time and money is going to pay you back in the longer term. So I want to take a moment to recognise the elephant in the room, which is that you are, as undergraduates and perhaps some early careers master students, still figuring out some pretty big questions about yourselves. Who am I? What's important to me? And what do I want my life to look like? Now, these questions are a neuroscientific reality of being in your late teens and early 20s because you haven't yet had a huge number of experiences to draw on to help you figure the answers to those questions out. So actually, it's no wonder that the things that you have experienced, your intrinsic motivation, your love of subject, those things feel like some of the most certain things that you do actually know about yourself. And it's a bit like being lost. If we can't figure out where we are, then it's quite hard to know where we can get to. And that can end up with us feeling really quite precarious. So I'm going to share a couple of ways to get your bearings on the world of work that will reassure you that your intrinsic motivation is safe, but will also have enduring value to you beyond your degree. Firstly, what is the future of work? Well, it may seem counterintuitive to try to offer you certainty by posing perhaps one of the great unanswerable questions. But actually, there's quite a bit that we already know about what the future of work is likely to look like that we can work with right now. First of all, the employment market is non-linear. By that, I mean that you might enter the workplace from one origin point, your degree subject, but your destination can be pretty much anywhere. And that's because in the UK, around 80 to 85% of graduate employers aren't actually looking for graduates of a particular subject. They value you as a graduate, but they're looking for something else other than your subject matter entirely. And I'll come back to what that is in a minute. Because in practice, what this means is that history graduates become tax auditors and philosophy graduates go into management consultancy, music graduates can go into the justice system, classical languages graduates can go into software development, and even very vocationally aligned medical students can chuck it all in and become a patisserie chef or a racing driver. The point is that when you choose a career you want to do, you're going into something else that has intrinsic value to you. And employers want that to be the case. They want you to have loved your degree, no matter what subject it was in, and bring that passion to your career of choice. Secondly, I think the workplace of the future is already becoming something that we can describe as transdisciplinary. So you might already be familiar with the idea of cross-disciplinary or multidisciplinary. In fact, if you're doing a joint honours degree, as I did as an undergraduate, or you've taken additional modules in other subjects, then your degree can be described in this way because you're drawing on different disciplines without changing any of them. Interdisciplinary working happens when two or more disciplines get blended together with the intention of tackling a new problem by combining existing disciplinary approaches. And a good example of this is something like bioinformatics, where two disciplines have combined to create a new discipline which explores issues that both disciplines are concerned with but can't tackle on their own. But transdisciplinarity is something completely different, because the principle here is that you are innovating completely new ways of thinking about problems by drawing on your discipline, but not sticking to it. You're creating new ways of thinking that result from all the different perspectives or approaches that occur when they spark off each other, rather than one perspective or discipline absorbing another or combining with each other. And this is an approach that intentionally brings together people with diverse backgrounds and different disciplinary specialisms to create something that is bigger and newer than anything that they could bring individually. And this ultimately changes the question to how will we be working? If we start from the problems and let them define what needs to be done, and if we think about the problems that defining our society, which are really essentially wicked problems like the Sustainable Development Goals, they have a number of features in common. They are complex problems, they're cross-system and cross-functional problems, they sit across sectors, and above all, they move beyond existing solutions and ways of thinking. We can't solve huge problems like this in the old way. We need new ways of working that are different to all the things that we've ever done before. And that's the principle behind transdisciplinary working, that you need multiple perspectives bringing equal dynamism with the expectation that each of them and collectively is the key to the ability to find a solution. And it's much easier to see how the perspectives of humanities graduates have a role in this kind of approach. Because when we recognize that the problems we need to solve have this in common, we can immediately see the skills that we need to tackle them, which is the ability to see and make connections, the ability to break ideas and problems down, to synthesize information in new ways, to connect with others, and above all, the ability to recognize and respond to uncertainty and ambiguity. And these are the skills you innately develop when you study subjects like English. And what thinking like that does is to reframe our understanding of what a degree or any qualification is for. Traditionally, we think of it as knowledge, but really we want to move away from that and towards the idea that transferable skills and attributes that you innately develop because you study English or any other humanities subject are actually going to be really key to future ways of working. In fact, we're seeing that already right now, because even very august think tanks like the World Economic Forum recognize that this is the case. And in 2020, just before the pandemic, they predicted the skills that they thought would be needed in all workplaces by 2025. Now, this tiny list, which you won't be able to see terribly well, covers 15 different areas. And in practice, it's much more than 15 different skills. But the key point is how prominent the skills are in this list that are innate to the study of humanities subjects like English. And when we look at how the skills contrast, we can really see the benefits of thinking from a transdisciplinary point of view, that you're juxtaposing creativity with analysis, or active learning with technology, or even emotional intelligence with systems analysis. This is how we're going to get to new solutions. And humanities graduates are not outsiders in this world of work. They are essential insiders. So if we come back to our idea of intrinsic motivation for a moment, that love of subject that you can be really confident of right now, I want to propose to you that with that comes something that we can call the intrinsic value of that love of subject, a value that employers also recognize and is key to the workplace, but is something tangible and more enduring than simply your love of subject. Because you might think that what you take away from that love of subject is all the stuff that you've learned, the knowledge that you've accumulated from everything you've read and discussed and thought about. But you've also developed a wide range of attributes. Those are behaviors and qualities and values like curiosity and open-mindedness, tolerance for ambiguity and uncertainty. And you've also develop this vast range of transferable skills and all the experience of engaging with difficult questions and ideas as you learn your subject. And there's another word for this. We call it employability. It's the stuff that employers are looking for in new employees. And it's the language that employers use to describe the roles they want to employ to. But I think it's also just as in keeping with how our love of subject connects to our identity to think of this as the intrinsic value of our subject, which means that work doesn't have to be a separable, extrinsic, disconnected thing at all when we recognize our love of subject within the skills and attributes that we use at work. So to wrap up, I just want to touch briefly on what those transferable skills are, because this is the richest area of intrinsic value that you bring from your degree to whatever future choice you make about your career. And the great thing about transferable skills is that they apply across a huge diversity of different professional contexts and sectors and different jobs, albeit often in different combinations, but largely in exactly the same way as you use them in your subject study right now. And here's just a selection of them now, but things that you will recognize: contextualization, analysis of text, argument decision making, persuasion and influencing, and so on. And when you read a job description, this is the language that you're going to see. And whether you choose a role that's very proximate to English in the academic space, like some of the ones you're going to hear about this afternoon, or you go as far off removed as software development or tax audit or AI, again, roles you're going to hear about this afternoon, you are still innately close to home. So I hope that it's a bit clearer now that the narratives you might encounter about the graduate workplace being a difficult place for humanities graduates to enter or succeed in can be readily reimagined. Thomas Nash had a capability to see the negative, I think, in many things, but I propose to you that your intrinsic love affair with English and its role in forming your identity is not going to wither on exposure to the workplace. On the contrary, I think that we can reconstruct Nash's proposition that you study your subject because you love it, and to suggest that because you love your subject, it will enable you to enter the workplace and bring all its value with you. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found that useful.
Thanks very much, Kate. That was a really excellent talk to start with. And I really appreciated the optimistic note of the love of subject to start with, even though the problems, as you described them, are wicked problems. So, and I hope we can keep that kind of optimistic note as we go forward. Our next speaker is Gabby Binney. Gabby is head of funded projects at Grad Consult, a consultancy based here in Sheffield, specializing in connecting educators and employers, and she's worked closely with a range of UK universities, and she's going to talk to us about careers. Over to you, Gabby.
Thanks, Archie. I'm really hoping that this presentation will lead quite nicely on from Kate's. We do cover some of the same themes, but look at them through slightly different lenses. I'm also going to talk more generally about the humanities rather than just specifically English, because I think it's really important to kind of look at the overall picture and look at some of the macro stuff that humanities graduates might encounter as they progress into the next stage of their career. As Archie said, I work for a really small consultancy business called Grad Consult. We're based in Sheffield. And we almost work at the intersection between universities and employers. So we work with lots of universities to help them think about employability in different ways, and pull together projects to develop the employability of their students. But also we work with so many different organisations looking to recruit really, really great graduates. And as Kate mentioned in her presentation, the vast majority of organisations that we work with actually don't have a specific degree requirement. They're interested in receiving applications from lots of different graduates from different degree disciplines, because the UK is almost quite unique in that we do have a really non-linear labour market, which I think presents some real opportunities for graduates, but also some challenges as well. If the world is your oyster, how do you pick a next step? So some of the topics that I'm going to cover in this presentation also refer back to those that were alluded to by Kathy, thinking about the future of work, and also kind of the current picture for humanities graduates. So what I wanted to start with is a little bit to do with the elephant in the room, which is some of the narratives and attitudes that exist around the humanities. Now, some of you will have seen headlines like this, looking at, a humanities degree won't get you a really great job or won't get you a really good salary. And I thought it was important to kind of flag these because it can be quite disheartening. So for a humanities graduate who's thinking about that next step, someone who's pursued a degree because of their love of the subject, as Kate said, it can be a little bit demoralizing to see such headlines. And I want you to turn that demoralization, if you feel it, into a rallying cry. And I'll come back to this at the end of the presentation, but I think there's a lot that we can do as people working in higher education, but also people studying humanities degrees to start challenging these narratives and saying publicly into politicians that a humanities degree is vitally important, both as individuals because we love the subject, but also to the UK's economy and globally as well. So the first thing I thought we should talk about is what humanities graduates actually go on to do after they finish their subject. We're somewhat lucky in the UK in that we collect a lot of data about what graduates go on to do once they've left their university. And this is through the Graduate Outcomes Survey. Some of you may be aware of this, some of you may have filled out this survey previously if you're a master's graduate. But the Graduate Outcomes Survey essentially provides us with a snapshot of what graduates are doing from different universities and from different degree disciplines 15 months after they leave their degree. So what we can see here is the outcomes of graduates who studied English 15 months after they left their institution. So there's always a bit of a time lag with this data. But we can see the vast majority of them are either working full-time or working part-time. There's quite a few people who are studying further qualifications or working while they juggle studying as well. So if we look at the humanities as a whole, rather than just English, we can see that the proportion of graduates in full-time or part-time work is just under the average, which is 68.7%. And unemployment is slightly higher than the average at 15 months. So it's about 7.3% for English, 7.9% for history, and 7.3% for philosophy. Overall, the rate of unemployment is about 5.9%. This might seem quite scary, but obviously that is quite a small percentage overall. We can also see the salaries of people from those degree disciplines 15 months after they've left their university. And for humanities graduates, again, the salary is somewhat smaller than the national average. So the national average is 24,974 to be precise. But the average salary for those English literature graduates is about 20,000. And for history graduates, it's about 22 to 23,000. So again, I wanted to share this with you just to put into context what an average graduate salary looks like, because sometimes it can be really strange going into that kind of first graduate role and thinking, is this a good salary? What does this look like in comparison to the average? The other reason I wanted to flag this is because if we think about the political narratives around the humanities, this data doesn't always give us a good point on which to fight, because compared to science subjects and the wider picture, humanities perform just slightly below average. It's not a huge concerning level, but it is important when we think about the political context and that political narrative that subjects should be seen as successful if they lead to successful employment outcomes. So there's typically that kind of binary level of success is used to offer a very crude measure of the value of a degree. And again, I just want you to hold that thought in your head. Does measures of success, like being in a job or earning a certain salary, really show that your degree has had value? And are there other ways that we can demonstrate, both politically and personally, the value of a degree that we've received in the humanities? Now, I have to kind of give a bit of credit in that the data we collect is somewhat better than it was in the past, because we now ask questions about how people reflect on what they're doing at the time. So we ask something called the reflection questions. And what we can see from that is that 82% of humanities graduates feel that what they're doing at the moment, whether that's in work or in further study, is meaningful to them. So the vast majority of humanities graduates are going on to do something that they find meaningful. And this is very similar to the national average as well. 71% of humanities graduates say that what they're doing at the moment fits in with their future plans. Again, this is pretty good. It's slightly lower than the average, but it's still a really good figure. But only 61% say that they're utilising what they've learned on their degree. And again, something I want you to hold in your minds, as Kate mentioned earlier, we might not develop very specific technical skills from a humanities degree, like you would see in maybe a computing or a science course, like being able to use a specific programming language. But there is a whole host of other kind of skills, knowledge, and attributes that you develop during your degree that will be utilised with whatever you go in to do. So while it might not be specific technical stuff, I just want to flag that all of the other things that you're experiencing and doing will be incredibly important, whether you go on to work or further study. So actually, I think that figure probably should be higher. I think we need to recognise as humanities graduates all of the good stuff that we learn and develop during our degree. So we can see that we are utilising that. So one of the big problems that I find and challenges that I see with the graduate outcomes data is it looks purely at an individual's outcomes at 15 months after they graduate. Now, this is a very specific point in time. And, you know, while in the past, being able to see something at a specific point in time would allow us to predict outcomes of the future, that's certainly not the case anymore. So if we look back a few generations, and perhaps historically as well, the labour market used to be quite linear and predictable. So you'd join an organisation and you'd work your way up over a certain amount of time. Now, the world of work has changed massively, as Kate shared in her presentation, and things like technology, flattened hierarchies, and decreased job stability have meant that where a career used to be perhaps seen as a ladder, it's now more of a plate of spaghetti, as I like to say. So career thinking has really changed in line with the different ways of work that we encounter in technology in society today. And I really like this quote: "A career is not a single moment of decision when we choose one job over another. It is deeply woven into the ongoing fabric of our lives." And there are lots of different ways to think about our careers that that don't relate to it being very linear and static. So Protean career thinking is where you follow your values and follow what brings inspiration to you and adapt fluidly within the labour market to apply those values and to see those values in different industries and different job types that you may not have as expected or predicted to. And it's all about being very kind of guided by your own values in the decisions that you make about your own career. Similarly, boundaryless mindsets are all about where a person isn't kind of constrained by boundaries like physical location or psychologically by sector or job type, but really see opportunities outside of those traditional boundaries. And I'd certainly say that with the labour market as it currently is and as it looks to be in the future, with increased remote working and hybrid working, we can often shake those boundaries, the physical boundaries that might have constrained us in the past. So adopting ways of thinking about your career in a more values-driven, more opportunity-seeking way allows you to kind of navigate a very squiggly career path. And equally, a lot of people don't tend to just work for one organisation at a time. People often have portfolio careers where they might have jobs for a couple of years and then move on to the next one, or have multiple different types of jobs for different organisations that they juggle at once while pursuing their own passions and interests. And we might term that a portfolio career. So there is no one single way to navigate your career. And there are lots of different ways to kind of go through your career thinking. So certainly don't look at the careers of friends or family and see that as a blueprint. Actually, a more modern and a more kind of interesting way to look at your career is to follow what makes sense to you and follow your own values. Now, we can have a look at things like salaries later on after graduates have left their degree and have entered the labour market. And this gives us a slightly better picture of those employment outcomes than the Graduate Outcomes Survey, which is so restrictive at that 15-month point. So we can have a look at the salaries of graduates who left their degree or left their university in 2008 and 2009. And we see that those history graduates, just using that for an example, have actually come on leaps and bounds in their career and are earning an average salary of about 33,000, which is the same as graduates from biosciences courses, veterinary sciences courses, and is also higher than materials and technology graduates. And again, I'm not saying this to kind of define salaries as something that we should all be judging the success of our careers on, but I think it's helpful to understand some of the metrics that are out there and how they're politically interpreted when we're thinking about our own career. And just to add a bit of nuance to that, if you do see figures like this bandied around, they're incredibly generic and there's a lot of nuance behind the data. So it's certainly not something for you to kind of look at your own career and judge yourself on or those of others. And I think it's important, again, to just restate the fact that measures of career like salary or kind of employment outcomes pay little or no attention to the individual behind those outcomes. So the context with which they came from, their background, what else they've got going on in their life, their motivations for studying their course. All of these things are really personal and subjective. And all of this data informs the kind of salary data, but also completely disregards it. So I think when we're talking about the value of our degree, we can look at outcomes, but it's only a very small part of the puzzle. By relating a degree to its monetary value, we're actually disregarding all of the value that it adds on top of that. And there are some really great careers and jobs that have real personal meaningfulness, either to an individual or a society, that actually look bad on paper because they don't perform as well on these binary employment metrics. So I think, you know, for us as educators and also as students, it's important to kind of fight against those narratives. So just looking ahead to the future in the UK, I pulled this out from Working Futures, which is an organisational group based out of the University of Warwick, looking at the future of employment within the United Kingdom. And what we can see from some of those big dots are some of the growth sectors of the UK over the next few years. And when you look at the bottom end of the grid, you can see manufacturing is actually a really kind of low growth area. But some of the high growth areas are the media, professional services, support services, arts and entertainment. So a lot of these real kind of like service-based economies where people with humanities degrees have so many transferable skills that could really work in those growth sectors. We also look at the 2020s and have termed them the UK's decisive decade. We've already seen some real significant changes over the last 3 years in terms of global crises, the way we work is changing, digital adoption is massively increasing. So it's a real kind of decade of change within the UK. And the UK's economy has some real strengths, which will mean it's able to succeed. So we're world leaders in so many different new technologies and new industries, and having that kind of world leading capability in research and development means that we also need world leading capability in all of the knowledge-based infrastructure that wraps around that stuff. Just to give an example, the UK just published a report into the future of flight. Now, as you can imagine, flight, there was a lot in there about technology, about AI, about drone flight and pilotless flights, and all of this real high-tech stuff. But of equal importance and significance in that report was the knowledge-based infrastructure that would need to be built in the UK in order for us to do all of that technology stuff. So they needed people who understood human behavior and understood how people would react to pilotless flights, or were able to communicate with the public about new types of flight, were able to kind of see problems and understand challenges politically. And I think this is really demonstrative really demonstrates the key role of the humanities in the adoption of digital technologies, in that it's all great to provide a technology, but what you really need is the people behind it to understand how that's going to be received and to see challenges in how people interact with technology. So as Kate said earlier, that kind of transferable nature of skills, that understanding of the human constructs will be incredibly important in just this one industry. And we've got many more of those different types of industries. We've also got other challenges in the UK. We're relatively low productive-wise compared to other OECD countries. That's because we often struggle with our management and leadership capabilities. So a lot of small businesses really need future leaders and managers in their organisation for us to change our businesses to be more productive. And again, this is a really great role for the humanities in being future leaders of organisations. But the UK is also going to really struggle with elevated levels of labour market insecurity. So we're already going through a little bit of recession, and that looks set to continue. So one of the important kind of things about the labour market over the next few years is that it will change dramatically, and there'll need to be an element of agility to navigate the changing labour market and to jump from job to job, or to do different things or think differently about careers. Some of the reasons why I flagged those changes to the UK economy, because the humanities sector is often kind of put combatively against the STEM sector, where people see, technology is going to be really important. That must mean that STEM is going to be really important. And of course it is, but actually the cultural knowledge and the critical thinking skills possessed by humanities graduates is what's going to really ensure that technological developments happen in a way that's going to meet the UN sustainability goals, are going to be good for people and good for society as a whole. And I really like this quote: as computers behave more like humans, the social sciences and the humanities will become even more important. And that's the president of Microsoft who said that, because as I've said, it's technology needs to have that humanities element in it in order for it to be successfully deployed in a way that's equal and accessible. And some of the things that humanities graduates have are those critical thinking skills, the instinct to challenge and debate and to consider alternative viewpoints. Those really valuable social skills like empathy and ethical awareness, which are really kind of well developed within a humanities degree. Humanities graduates are obviously able to use those different transferable skills to adapt to a really changeable labour market. So if we do go into a period of uncertainty, actually I'd say that those humanities graduates with a real kind of wealth of skills and a breadth of a skill set will be able to adapt and change and think about their careers in a really boundaryless way that other graduates might naturally struggle with a bit more. So having that kind of open mind with regards to careers means that you'll be able to take advantage of when the labour market is quite flexible and go for opportunities that, as Kate said, really kind of intrinsically motivates you and make the most of those. And I think what I've not talked about in this presentation is the value of the cultural sector. So sometimes we disregard the cultural sector, but it's contributed £27 billion to the UK's economy in recent years. And, the cultural sector isn't set to shrink. So there are lots of opportunities there that I know people will talk about later this afternoon. So in summary, I think there are a few things that humanities graduates can do to think about those challenges that are present in the labour market, take opportunities, and also fight against some of the really unhelpful narratives. So I think we need to share positive examples and positive stories about ways that humanities graduates have used their degree in very different ways, in different jobs, in different sectors, and different industries, to really demonstrate the value of that humanities degree and to really see our own value of a humanities degree within whatever we do next. I think it's important to embrace different opportunities, including ones that you might not have imagined. There are so many different sectors that will grow or just even exist in the next 5 to 10 years. And actually, if you can see how an English degree might be relevant in a certain sector or in a certain job, as Kate said, looking at those job descriptions and being open-minded about that will increase the number of opportunities that you have available to you. There's also the importance of following your feet or following your feelings. Again, where is your intrinsic motivation? What values you? And how can you follow those values into a next step or a next job that also kind of meets that intrinsic motivation? Thinking about your career as protean or boundaryless. We can also really think about our skills and understand what skills we're gaining from our degree and how we can utilize them in future work, and learning how to articulate them with employers. And finally, and this is what I think is my most important point of this presentation, that first step or that first job after a degree is just that. It's just a first step or a first job. Most people will have many different jobs, different careers, different roles throughout their life. So it's not, in the grand scheme of things, that important that it's a perfect next step, provided it's something that you find interesting and intrinsically fulfilling, because you will have many, many more steps. So don't try and worry too much about that kind of first step after your degree. It is just one of many. Thank you, Archie.
Thanks very much, Gabby, for an excellent presentation. It was really nice to see some of that data following on from Kate's talk, and to hear about ways to challenge the narratives, as you said. So we're going to move straight on to Dr. Jane Nolan's talk. Jane is a lecturer in music enterprise at Newcastle University, but also is an English graduate and has conducted recent research on the experience of studying English. So I'll hand straight over to you, Jane. I think you're muted, Jane, sorry.
The trope of this kind of thing being muted. Sorry about
I
that.
can hear you now, yeah.
Good, good. So I've had a very long career, during which I found my degrees in English have been extremely useful. So from being an owner of a business and an employer to working in higher education, the skills and capabilities from my degrees have been crucial. I've been continually learning and adapting, working in different sectors and in times of rapid change. And that personal experience was one of the reasons why I was very interested to research employability from English studies.
Jane, sorry, can I just interrupt you? I don't think we can see your slides.
You can't. It
Sorry
says I am screen sharing.
I think you might need to open the presentation.
It's really weird. It is actually it's open on my screen.
Oh.
We can see your folder, so it might be that you're sharing. There we are.
There it is.
Are you seeing it now?
Yeah. Great, we can see it now.
Okay. Is it moving as well? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Oh dear, technology and all that. So as I say, I've had this long career, I've been adapting and so on, and it just seemed really important to investigate this, to look into this, when government narratives seem to be questioning the value of non-vocational humanities subjects. Between 2011 and 2018, I did a PhD research project into employability from English studies. My research was ethnographic, which meant that I entered the life of the School of English at Northern University, getting to know staff, students and alumni. And this involved being there at a wide range of events, from teaching to student coffee mornings. And I was sharing the rhythms and cycles of the school for more than 5 years, creating a rich picture of the social world and cultures, and experiencing the very untidiness of ordinary life, which is complex, always in progress and changing through time. And that enabled me to move away from employability as an abstract, generalized concept, which is often seen in terms of quantitative metrics or getting a job, to one that can be understood through richly detailed individual stories and experiences. To deepen the data that I gathered through my fieldwork, I also undertook 120 interviews. I developed relationships with students during their studies and then during their early careers. So many of them I knew for more than 5 years. The students I worked with were self-selecting because participation was voluntary, but they were representative of the school cohort. My research has been in one institution, which can be seen as a limitation. However, ethnographies tell a story of a particular time and place, which speaks of and to broader concerns. And the stories I've been privileged to hear have enabled me to see how students have applied their skills and capabilities and understood their value in context. Some key themes from the research have been choice. So how and why students made their choice to study English. Transitions and transformations. So almost all students came to the university without knowing what they wanted to do as a career. And ultimately, their sense of identity, their values, and their beliefs played a strong role in their career choices. Some had transformational experiences which opened their awareness to possible future careers that they hadn't known about or imagined for themselves. And then translation, so how students came to understand and articulate their employability over time and through their transitions into their careers. Nash wrote about the uncertainty of the world in his time, just as we recognize uncertainties in the contemporary world. Employability needs to be placed in the context of rapid technological change and the increasing complexity of workplaces. This has led to a plethora of research reports and articles about the future of work. It's predicted that increasing automation and artificial intelligence will reduce some routine jobs, though there are also forecasts of increases in jobs that are adapted to new technologies. And jobs which are high in human empathy and interaction, creativity and emotional intelligence are predicted to continue. The skills developed by the humanities are recognized as essential for 21st century workplaces, and I've listed some of them on the slide. They clearly relate very much to the kinds of skills that are developed in subjects like English. I think it's also really important to note that employability requires the capability for lifelong learning to stay up to date in times of change. Students of English learn through critical and cultural inquiry, connected to the nature of human life, the cultural landscape, and the wider world, with global horizons. Staff and students in my study spoke about English as a doing degree, requiring active engagement with the subject, proactively managing your time, working both independently and with others. Effective oral and written communication in essays, reports, presentations, final year dissertations, using research skills, taking responsibility for your own work, developing intellectual independence, questioning, thinking critically, being reflective. These disciplinary skills map on to those which are seen as valuable for the future and those which employers value. My research participants had chosen their subject for love, joy, and interest, often inspired by their English teachers. They resisted the dispiriting narratives and assumptions about the limited careers from English studies, which family, friends, and peers sometimes came up with. What can you do with that? Or talking about it as a layabout degree where you just read books, or even calling it a useless degree. So a bit of a spoiler alert here that my research showed the opposite, that English degrees are highly useful. The students had enjoyed their studies, which they felt enabled them to do well. And they recognised that English studies are not narrowly vocational. They saw it as opening up horizons, which ultimately leaves many career paths open. Employability is often talked about as if it's something separate from disciplinary learning, but employability grows out of good higher education learning and teaching. Employability is more than getting a job, it's having the capacity to keep learning. Staff who participated in my research were aware of the value of the skills from English, those which were developed through the curriculum and disciplinary learning and teaching. They sought to develop critical thinking, responsive, engaged citizens of the world who were self-motivated, self-reliant, and independent. Studying English developed skills that were useful for every job, every career, and highly valued in workplaces and society. Skills for employability in the 21st century and in English can be related to the traditions and the philosophy of the discipline, to personal growth, which is based on empowerment and challenge, empathy, questioning, which supports personal development. And from my research, this remains at the heart of English studies. So where did their degrees take them? The 25 undergraduate students who I work with most closely have gone into a diverse range of careers, from the arts to artificial intelligence, and I've put some of their destinations there on the slide. I've also got a table at the very end, which just gives you a bit more detail, but a hugely diverse set of destinations. Returning to Nash and the uncertainty of the world and the ongoing shifts and changes in our own times, a degree in English is extremely useful. The students in my study found that their degree enabled them to be employable. However, they did define success more broadly than simply in terms of economic outcomes. They wanted to do meaningful work, have personal happiness and job satisfaction. Skills identified as important for employability in the 21st century are embedded in English. A student told me a story about a taxi driver who asked, "English, what will you do with that?" Instead, the question is, what do you want to do with your life? English opens up horizons, and English graduates are employable in a wide range of careers. There is a note there of the different kinds of destinations that the students went to.
Thanks very much, Jane. That was a great complement to the previous two talks as well, and obvious themes overlapping there, but really good to see it from the kind of storytelling perspective rather than the macro as before. So we have time for a couple of questions. If you do have burning questions, then please put them in the chat, as we're still monitoring the chat, but I thought I would just ask one of my own. We've heard a lot about transferable skills. That's kind of one of the main topics of those three presentations, and I was just wondering whether I could ask the speakers to identify just briefly what some of the less likely skills, or the skills that maybe occur less to humanities students while they're studying, what they are, and also maybe where they come from. So we've heard a lot about these wonderful skills, but I was just thinking from the perspective of a humanities student, you might be wondering, where am I getting all these skills? So maybe Kate, maybe start off on that question.
I don't think most humanities graduates, particularly English students, would think of themselves as problem solvers. But actually, if we break down problem solving, it's all about seeing things from different points of view. It's about making connections. It's about putting things in context. It's sometimes about really getting the right questions, asking the right questions to define the problem. But actually, if you're thinking about any seminar behavior that you're used to, or any group work with anybody else, all of the bits and pieces you need to solve problems are actually things that you do all the time. And I think that's quite a helpful way of thinking about the skills that we use. This is not just the skills that we use in a particular context, it's how they break down into different elements and how they can be reconfigured together. So I think of problem solving as quite a nice one that we wouldn't think of using all the time.
And Gabby, I don't know whether you had anything to mind.
I think one of the skills that humanities graduates have that they may not necessarily kind of think it of themselves is data analysis, because when we think of data analysis, we think of quantitative data. We don't necessarily think of all of the other skills that accompany that, about synthesizing huge amounts of information, about being able to handle a lot of different information. And related to what Kate said, to be able to pull from it conclusions and discussion points and then communicate them in a really effective way. So I think that's possibly one of the skills that humanities graduates have, but don't necessarily kind of join the dots that they do have it because of that, you know, that not necessarily understanding data analysis as being just about numbers. It's about everything else as well.
It's interesting that problem solving and data analysis are associated heavily with STEM subjects, probably by a lot of people. Jane, I wonder whether anything came out of your research that surprised you about what people said was most kind of enduringly useful to them.
I think actually it was more that as they reflected back on their experience, they then put in context all of the things that they had been doing, but at the time when they were thinking about essay writing or speaking in a seminar or working in a study group or putting together their final dissertation, that they hadn't appreciated how all the skills within that you need to do those things are actually transferable, that they are actually things that you can talk about in workplace terms. So I found that staff were aware of these of disciplinary skills being transferable. Students found it harder to narrate what they were doing, and that was kind of one of my findings, and something that I think we could maybe do more of as a discipline, is help people with narrating the skills that they have. If it was, I found, sometimes foreshadowed, if people had part-time jobs or they had done a more experiential module or had done some volunteering or extracurricular stuff, that in that context they could understand skills as transferable. But from their disciplinary work, they didn't think like that yet. And I think that's something that we could actually do more about, to help students see the transferability of what they're doing within their disciplinary studies.
I think that's a really valuable point, and probably quite a good one to finish on, as we are just at 2 o'clock there. So I think we will we'll end that first session there. Thanks again to Kate Daubeny, Gabby Binney and Jane Nolan for 3 really wonderful, stimulating talks, which I hope will set up our discussion of specific careers. So we'll take a short break now, and we will reconvene at 2:15 for the next session. But thanks again to our speakers for 3 excellent talks. Thank you.
Ooh, we've got our speakers. Oh, great, thank you. Right, recording in progress. So welcome back, everyone, to this second panel. So what's going to happen now is we've heard in our first panel about, I guess, area specialists talking about wider attitudes towards careers, changes that are happening in the past few years. But now we're going to hear from some of our English graduates over the next kind of 2 hours. So we're going to start off with a panel where we're going to be hearing from people who've gone into incredibly popular careers and things like the creative arts, journalism and the charity sector. And I'm sure we'll hear some more about some of those transferable skills and what they actually were once they realised further down the line what are the things that you can actually apply to your career. Put any questions that kind of come up in the chat, so we'll be monitoring that. We're going to start with a video from a freelancer, Lucy Shields, who is a graduate at Newcastle. She's had a very varied career. So she started off in publishing, and now she works as a freelance arts marketing consultant and agent. So we're partly going to hear a bit about that experience of how she applied to work in publishing as a sector, but also a little bit about freelancing. And I guess, although she's not here to respond to questions, that might be something you might want to discuss as a group, about whether we consider sort of freelancing in the arts as a viable career that we might want to go into afterwards. So I will now try and share that video. So it'll last 10 minutes and then we will go back. Oh, hi, Lucy's here. She's on a train. So that's brilliant. So she is here to respond. So even better, ask questions in the chat and Lucy might be able to respond to you in the chat. Okay, Lucy, I hope it's not too weird seeing a video of yourself. Right, okay.
Hello, my name is Lucy Shields and I'm here to talk to you a bit about creative careers and particularly the industries that I've worked in over the last 12 years since I graduated. So I studied English language and literature, and since then I've pursued a couple of different avenues really. First of all in publishing and secondly in music, and they're both quite challenging industries to get into because they're so popular with so many people being interested in working in them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges to get into those. So first of all, when I was studying, I thought that probably what I wanted to go into was publishing. So when I graduated, I actually I wanted to stay in Newcastle. So I got more of a general kind of admin job to stay up in Newcastle so that I could afford to live while I was looking for stuff to do. But in the meantime, was also trying to pick up experience of publishing. So I did an internship at a magazine called Ms. Lexia in Newcastle. I reviewed some albums and things for music related publications because that was a passion as well. And I also did this Getting into Publishing Day at Penguin Books, which I think it's something they do every year. I think they still do it, where you can apply. They get a lot of applications, but probably about 100 people get to go on the day. So I was really lucky that I managed to get a place to go along. I was incredibly nervous because I knew that this was what I really wanted to do. But on the day, you get to meet people from Penguin who work in all the different areas, and network with them and everything. So I went along, managed to chat to lots of people. There was also the opportunity to do a competition to try and apply for some work experience. So that was kind of proving your marketing skills really with that. So I did that, and I managed to win that competition. So I got the work experience with the marketing team, but I also did lots of networking and got some work experience with the editorial team as well. So a difficult thing with work experience and doing all this work for free is that if you're not from a privileged background and you haven't got plenty of money behind you, it's difficult to be able to do all that work for free. So how I'd sort of managed really was that I had this full-time job in a more admin sort of role. And actually the way I did my work experience was I did it all on annual leave. So I pretty much just used all of my holiday that year on work experience, which is a tough thing to do because you actually want your time off to be time off, but I used it all to do other work to get all this experience. And also I was quite lucky, the competition that I won, I also got a load of restaurant vouchers. So while I was doing my work experience, I actually ate in Carluccio's very, very frequently, so that I could eat for free as well. So it is a tricky thing. Like also with the work experience I was doing for a magazine, at that point in time, I was part-time in my other job. So I was part-time at the magazine, part-time in my other job, and just managing to make ends meet really. So that's one thing to think about, that it is kind of expected in something like publishing that you'll do plenty of work experience really. And it's not right that you should have to do a lot of work for free, but it is one of the ways that it is. So I went through all of that and got some really great experience and tried to get a job at Penguin, came very close, came in the like top couple of people, but just didn't quite get it, which was very devastating at the time. But I ended up getting a job with an academic publisher in Yorkshire, which was kind of better because I could live in the north and still get back to my boyfriend at the time, who was still living in Durham. And that's something to think about as well with something like publishing. It's obviously very London centric, which if you're settled on wanting to live somewhere else, it's quite tricky to find jobs. And it's maybe something where you need to get the experience in London for a couple of years and then get your job somewhere else. Because it is quite tricky to get the experience. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation if you're looking for a job close to you. But anyway, I managed to get this job in academic publishing. And then through that, I kind of discovered that one thing I really enjoyed was marketing. So when I was studying, I did English language and literature, which I really enjoyed because it combined the more sort of creative stuff with the more analytical side of things. And marketing's like that as well. You need to be creative, but you also need to be methodical and good with data and things like that. So I found that I really enjoyed marketing and went off in that direction a bit instead. So, and yeah, initially within publishing, but then I sort of moved on to working for a digital marketing agency and did a bit of proofreading. But I really wanted a vocation. That's what I'd always wanted to do, something that I was passionate about. And I sort of set my heart really on working at Sage Gateshead, which is a music venue up here in Gateshead. I applied again and again, had 2 or 3 rejections where I'd gone for an interview and didn't quite get it. And then I'd have to wait maybe several months or even a year before an opportunity came up again. And I just kept trying and trying until I got it. So it was really hard won. Eventually got it. And then the pandemic happened. So I'd only been there several months when the pandemic happened, got furloughed and then got made redundant, and it was just heartbreaking. Then I got a job at a university. But by that point, during the lockdown, when I was furloughed, I started a newsletter actually about folk music, which is my passion. And it introduced me to lots of people and lots of organizations. And I started to get offers of freelance work. And I got more and more opportunities were kind of popping up. And I had to think, am I going to make this leap into working for myself, which was a bit scary in the middle of a pandemic to step into the unknown. But I did. And now I work for myself. So I'm a freelance arts marketer, really, but I'm also a booking agent for music artists. So I've actually got quite a diverse range of things that I do, which is a good idea if you're freelance to kind of spread your bets. So you're not relying on one industry or one client or anything. So I do marketing for organizations. I do PR for artists if they're releasing an album or going on tour. I'm a booking agent for artists, and I also do more general copywriting, which is a really versatile skill that I can do outside of marketing as well. So I've ended up kind of building my own career that's sort of completely shaped around my interests and experience. And I can also work from home, so it's really flexible. So it's all come good in the end, really, after a very long meandering kind of path. I just want to sort of talk a little bit about the fact that it is so difficult that I've got here now, but that's 12 years worth of journey and trying so hard to get into different things. So the other day on Facebook, it popped up as a memory. I'm going to share my screen of something that I posted at the time. This is after I didn't get the job at Penguin. I made this post. So I said, I need a new career route to aspire to. This one's just one heartbreaking turn down after the last. I know, cheer up, right? But it's just kind of a bit of an idea of how it can feel when you're trying to get into something that is so hard and you're just putting your heart and soul into it and not getting there. And there will be those moments. If you want to work in a creative industry that you're really passionate about, it can be really rewarding when you get there. And if you want it, go for it. But it will have challenges to get there. And you're just going to have to be very resilient and hardworking and prove yourself. But Nevertheless, I am very happy with how things have turned out in the end, and I wouldn't change the fact that that I'm working in a creative field. You know, I wouldn't give it up to work in something that's better paid. It's not the best paid industry, but I want to do something I'm passionate about. And so I'd say to all of you, if there's something you really want to do, go for it. And I hope you find a role that will make you really happy. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Lucy. It must be really nerve-wracking. I know it's nerve-wracking having to talk on Zoom anyway, but especially to have a recording of yourself played. So thanks so much. What I think would be useful is, as we did with the previous panel, if we go on to our next speaker first, and then I think that we'll probably have some themes that might kind of emerge, and I'll draw some things out. So yeah. Excellent presentation, thanks so much. Next, we have Charlotte Rose, who's a political reporter for the BBC, and she's based at Westminster. So she's going to talk to us a bit about how she went along that career path. Thanks, Charlotte.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. It's great to be with you all today. I'm here to give you some good news because I graduated in a recession, and it's okay. You are going to work. You are going to get a job. You will get there. We don't need to be doom mongers here. I studied English literature at the University of Sheffield from 2005 to 2008, and then I went back to uni again to City University in London to study for a master's in broadcast journalism in 2011 to 12. As Kate said, I currently work as a political reporter for the BBC based in Westminster, but I would agree with the other people who've been speaking today when I would say I have taken something of a wiggly career path to get to where I am today. When I left university in 2008, I really wanted to stay in the city because I loved it so much, and I had lots of friends as well who were going to still be living there. And I got a job with Sheffield City Council, and I worked for 2 years based in the leader of the council's office, doing a mixture of policy work, but also some communication stuff. So drafting newsletters for council members, writing press releases, and reading a lot of council reports, which is as exciting as you might imagine. I then moved down to London in 2010 to work for a think tank. It was not a particularly glamorous one. It was one which thought about local government and devolution. There I was involved with things like running events and recruiting both councils and also private firms to be part of our network. They paid a membership fee in order to take part in some of our research and get sort of bespoke policy work done for them. Now, this was something which worked as a financial model up until 2010, but then when massive cuts came to council budgets, this was no longer viable. And so I was facing redundancy as the firm essentially just had no money to employ people anymore. And so in 2011, I applied to do a master's in broadcast journalism at City University, and I was very fortunate to get a place there. And my master's was in both radio and television. Before I finished doing my master's, I actually started working for the BBC at Radio Norfolk, which is about as Alan Partridge as you might imagine it to be. And I covered stories from a man who was very angry that an otter was eating all of his koi carp to a horse which got its hind legs stuck in a hole. So as you can see, incredibly highbrow and important journalism going on there. I have worked for the BBC for the last 10 years. I've done a range of different roles working for the BBC Parliament channel as a political reporter based in both Essex and also in Sheffield. And now, of course, I'm working in Westminster. And it would be quite easy for me here and now to construct this idea that I had followed a career path that had magically got me to where I am today. But that would be, you know, a complete lie. I had no idea when I first left university that this is where I was going to end up. I've picked up really useful skills in all of the jobs that I've done, which have helped me get to where I am today. But I certainly wouldn't say that I had a grand plan or a path laid out in front of me. And I think it's important to remember that, you know, the only thing where you have to follow a fixed route is where you're running a marathon, or ideally when you're driving on the motorway. You know, everything else in life is really up to you to chart your own course. I would say, you know, journalism is something that I did always have an interest in, that I'd always wanted to do. I did work experience on a local paper when I was at secondary school. I wrote for the Forge Press when I was a student at Sheffield, and also had a radio show. And in the summer between my first and second year of my undergraduate degree, I did a placement on a radio station in Ghana, which was great fun, a crazy experience, and made me think, wow, this is an amazing job. I would definitely like to do this. But I think it would be fair to say that I didn't really know how to get into journalism, and I probably didn't really do enough research when I was at university. And I didn't know anyone in my family or any of my parents' friends who were involved in journalism. And so I guess that's why when I then looked to get into it after a few years in the world of work, I decided to do a master's. I would absolutely say that there are other routes into it depending on your circumstances and your finances. You know, there are lots of short courses you can do to learn the basic skills of things like shorthand and media law, which are quite essential. You can do them as part-time courses, you can do them as night courses, depending on how you're working at the time and whether you have carer responsibilities, whether you have a family, etc., etc. So it's important to find the right route for you. Also, there are lots of media organisations now, and the BBC is certainly one of them, that has apprenticeship and trainee programmes. So you actually don't need to have you know, a master's or something like that before you go into it, and you can get trained on the job. They are obviously extremely competitive, and you will be expected to show that you've done some work experience in the field, but those are definitely out there and worthwhile researching, and that is for a whole range of different organizations, whether it's, you know, radio, newspapers, television, digital, online, whatever it is that you want to do. I'd say it's well worth researching that. I think it's important, all I would say is it is important to kind of make sure that the course you're doing is an accredited one. So the way that you look for that sort of quality stamp is if it is accredited by either the NJCT, which is the National Journalism Training Council, or the BJTC, which is the Broadcast Journalism Training Council. I'm happy to take questions afterwards, or for people to email me afterwards, and I can give you more information about those kind of different routes. In terms of the skills that I got from my university experience, we've talked a lot already about the kind of things that humanities could do, but I would kind of pick out a few specific ones. The first is deadlines. Are you or are you not a deadline oriented person? Because I am very much a deadline oriented person. I really need the fear of the deadline for me to be able to pull my finger out and actually get the essay written. So it's good for me that I work in a job now where I am focused on delivering to deadlines. For some people that's terrible and they work much better just, you know, working along at their own pace. But for me, that's really good. And I think one of the kind of things we don't always think about is that university is a great place to test out what you do well, how you learn well, so how you like to take in information, so that when you go into the workplace, you can say to an employer, I find that I can take in information best when it's visual, or when I'm both reading and listening. That helps you to sort out how they can best, you know, get the best out of you, and you can get the best out of that workplace, but also how you work well. Do you work well in groups and teams, or are you better working by yourself? So I think you should really see your university time as a time to sort of experiment with what works well for you in terms of how you work and how you want to work in the future. We've talked a little bit about the ability to synthesize information, and certainly doing your own research is really important in English literature and any other humanities courses. Sort of sifting through lots of journal articles to get the quotes that you need, and that's necessary in a whole range of different professions, but clearly in journalism that is quite vital. Also, the idea of weighing up credibility. You know, we talk a lot now about fake news and about verifying our sources, and that's something that's really important to the BBC. But a lot of, you may not think of it like this, but a lot of what you're doing on your course is reading and learning different people's interpretation of a text, deciding which version you agree with or whose ideas support your thesis and what you're going to be arguing. So I think that's an absolutely vital skill. And as well, of course, as the academic skills you learn lots of things from your extracurricular activities, whether that's, you know, sports or societies or whatever else you might be doing, whether that's a part-time job. I mean, I ran to be union president when I was in my 3rd year, and that taught me some really important life lessons, which I would say I still use on a day-to-day basis, because, you know, standing on the concourse in the wind, the rain and the cold, trying to talk to people who are largely very uninterested in what you have to say is actually remarkably similar to standing on the street trying to do vox pops now. So, you know, that is a life lesson that I have taken directly from university to my current day job. The reason I wanted to get into journalism, and the best thing about it, it is different every day. And I know that people will say that about lots of different jobs, but with journalism, it is literally true, because otherwise it wouldn't be in the news if it wasn't different to what happened before. And I'm a person who's excited and motivated by doing new things, so it gives me that experience. And working where I do at the moment, I'm just hugely privileged to have this kind of side seat on history, especially in the past year with everything that's been happening. I was standing in Downing Street on the morning that Boris Johnson left Number 10 and when Liz Truss arrived, and I was also then back there just over a month later when Liz Truss left again. But as well as doing that sort of political stuff, I was also standing outside Westminster Abbey watching the procession for the Queen's funeral, and being a witness to that kind of stuff is just, you know, incredible, and I feel so lucky and so privileged to be able to do it. The final thing I'd say in terms of the advice I would give to my younger self, I think we've already talked a little bit about this in the first session, but thinking about the modern world of work, I wouldn't think of it as about a set of jobs leading you on a kind of set career path, but instead about developing a set of skills which you can transfer across different sectors and different roles. Because as we've already said, there are lots of things that you will be developing as skills and have already developed that would be useful across a wide range of different sectors. They're not just applicable to some of the classic Magnum English and humanities degrees. And the other thing is just kind of, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but be a bit kind to yourself and don't worry about what you're doing compared to other people. You know, social media can be really terrible for you, looking at other people's perfectly curated lives and thinking, oh, I didn't get to go on a beach holiday this year. But it's exactly the same, you know, with your career, because people will reach different places at different paces. And I do think it's important that everyone kind of takes their own route. And I would just give as an example, one of my course mate friends, who I'm still friends with to this day and who I've lived with as a housemate, when he graduated from university, he wasn't sure exactly what he wanted to do. He worked in Asda for a while. He both delivered and collected the 2011 census, and he's now the night editor at The Guardian. So, you know, you will get there. You just have to say yes to opportunities, and just, you know, get those sharp elbows out and believe in yourself, and don't compare yourself to what other people are doing.
Thanks so much, Charlotte. That was a really inspiring talk. And actually, I can already see quite a lot of shared themes emerging that we've got here, kind of resilience of doing this job, and also just that lots of things can go wrong. The pandemic, we've all seen that, no matter what your background. So yes, resilience to keep going. Right, so have a think about any further kind of questions that you might have meanwhile. But before that, we will hear from Ellen Yurzak, who is a senior fundraising manager at Oaks Consultancy, so working in the charity sector. So Ellen, the floor is yours. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Lovely, thank you. So yes, I am a bit unusual, I think, in that I went straight into the charity sector and fundraising from uni, and have been in it for my whole career so far, since graduating in 2013. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what that journey's looked like for me. So I did an English literature degree at the University of Sheffield, and like a lot of people, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my future career when I first went to uni. But I loved books and writing and stories, and so English literature felt like a natural fit. And then while I was at uni, I took part in a lot of extracurricular activities. And honestly, that is probably my main bit of advice for any student, is absolutely make the most of everything that uni has to offer. One of the reasons that I chose Sheffield was because of the number of societies and things to get involved in. While I was there, I took part in Supco shows, I was an editor of Forge Press, I volunteered for the Nightline student listening service, and I also got a part-time job. And that job was as an Alumni Fund student caller. So basically involved 2 evenings a week, phoning up people who used to be students at Sheffield, finding out about their time at uni and what they're up to now, and then ultimately asking them for a donation to support current students, usually through bursaries or some other program. And I found that I really enjoyed speaking with the alumni and hearing their stories and telling them a bit about me. And I also found that I was really good at getting donations. And that is how I learned that fundraising was a career. And I think I always had in the back of my head that I wanted to do something that felt important, something that kind of mattered and felt like it was making the world a better place, but I didn't really know what that could be. I knew that I wasn't good enough at maths to be a doctor, and I definitely didn't have the patience to be a teacher. But the more that I then read about fundraising and the charity sector, the more it started to click for me. And it also became apparent that the skills I was building through my degree and my society involvement were all really valuable to that kind of role. So if you look at any fundraising job spec, it will talk about communication skills, being organised, being able to sift through information and draw meaningful conclusions, planning, and most importantly, building relationships. Once I knew I wanted to go into fundraising, I had a chat with the career service and they advised that I looked into getting some mentoring. So I went through a process with the career service and they matched me with a past student of the university who at that point was then working for the British Heart Foundation as a community fundraiser. And she was absolutely fab, really generous with her time. She answered lots of questions for me. She ran through the kinds of things I was likely to be asked in interviews and even helped me prepare for sort of a mock interview task. And she also gave me some great advice on where to look for jobs and opportunities. So websites like Charity Job, Guardian Jobs and Third Sector Jobs, but also a lot of the big charities do have their own careers pages where you can sign up for job alerts and get emails anytime anything goes live. So by this point, I'm about halfway through my 3rd year and I started looking for opportunities post-graduation. And I made the decision to go for a charity internship. At the time, there were not necessarily that many entry-level jobs and a lot of charities were looking for interns specifically. Unfortunately, the vast majority of those internships were unpaid, but actually I think that's something that has changed a great deal in the 10 years since I was looking for one. Not only are most internships in the charity sector now paid, there are also more kind of apprenticeships and just more willingness to open out entry-level roles to people who might not have that direct experience of working in the charity sector. So I think there are a lot more opportunities there now. But as for me, I was successful in getting an internship at Birmingham St Mary's Hospice, and I worked there 3 days a week for 3 months, after which I secured my first full-time paid role as a regional community fundraiser at Diabetes UK, covering the Midlands area. Community fundraising is, I think, a really great route into fundraising because the roles tend to be spread out across the UK, so you don't have to be based in London. And it's a job that involves elements of lots of types of fundraising. So as it sounds, it's a job that involves working closely with the local community to promote your cause and build relationships. So people will come to you with fundraising ideas, which could be anything from a bake sale to a sponsored walk to a gala dinner, and you're there to support them and inspire them and help them raise as much money as possible. And it involves working with individuals and branches of companies, local groups like Rotary clubs or women's institutes, and some charities also have their own fundraising groups. It's really varied and really focused on providing an excellent supporter journey and building strong relationships. I was in that role for 2 years, then moved to a similar one at Cancer Research UK, which I did for 3.5 years. By that point, I felt like I'd learned a lot and done what I wanted to do in that kind of role, so I started to think about my next step. I'd been on an internal leadership program, which was really great, I think big charities in particular are really good at investing in learning and training opportunities for their staff, even though they can be quite competitive to get on. This is unfortunately when I did start to come up against a few barriers, mainly around location. I was looking at manager roles and roles in other areas of fundraising and kept being told that I either needed to be based in London or be in the London office 2 to 3 days a week. I live in Birmingham, and making that commute that often was just not viable for me for lots of reasons. Again, though, I think this is an area where the charity sector is absolutely improving. Not quite at the pace I'd like to see, but because of the pandemic, a lot more employers now recognise you don't need to be physically in an office to do good work. So a lot more charities are willing to hire people who live in different parts of the country and work remotely with just occasional travel into an office. I do still think there's an element sometimes that they'll say a role is hybrid and then actually set conditions about coming to London a certain number of times a week, which is a bit of a shame. But as I say, it's getting better. And I think kind of as the market demands it more and more, they'll just have to keep getting more and more flexible. So I did then secure a management role as regional fundraising manager at a charity called Dementia UK. And that essentially involved managing a team of 4 people doing the job that I used to do. That was a maternity cover position, and I do think those kinds of roles are a great way to progress in the charity sector. Charities are much more willing to take a risk on someone stepping up if it's for a 12-month position like a maternity contract or a secondment or something like that. And if you're good, they will then more often than not try to find a way to keep you, which is what happened to me. And then after Dementia UK, I did a similar role at Shelter. And then last year, I moved to the Prince's Trust as head of regional philanthropy for the Central region. That was like a sideways move for me. So I still had a team, but this time our focus was on major donors and trusts and foundations. So working with a smaller amount of people to secure gifts worth a greater amount. And that meant really getting to know donors, what their motivations were for supporting the charity, their interests, their passions, and then finding projects that would really inspire them. And during that time, I've secured gifts of up to £100,000. Throughout my career, I've been really involved with the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, which is the membership body for fundraisers. I joined the local committee for the West Midlands, which really helped me to build my network within the sector and learn more about different types of fundraising and examples of what's working well through these monthly speaker sessions that were put on and an annual conference. And then from 2019 to 2022, I was actually chair of that committee. So I had oversight of all of our events, recruited new committee members and supported the 14 current ones. And that helped me to grow as a manager and as a leader. If anyone is thinking of working in fundraising, I would really recommend getting involved with your local Chartered Institute of Fundraising group. They exist all over the country and regularly put on networking events. So it's a great opportunity to keep learning and developing regardless of where you're at in your career. So then in November, I moved to my current role, which is Senior Fundraising Manager at Oaks Consultancy. This has been quite a big change for me because it's my first proper job, not actually within the charity sector, but still working adjacent to it. So Oaks is a consultancy based here in Birmingham, which works with the sport, education, housing and charity sectors to support them with their strategic planning, fundraising and income generation. We do a mixture of consulting work where we help our clients to write strategies and business plans. And we also do retainers where we provide resource for fundraising activities like writing bid applications or approaching companies about partnership opportunities. I really enjoy it. For me, I've always been motivated by having the biggest impact possible for good causes. And now I get to work with lots of them at the same time and make a real difference to multiple organisations and their beneficiaries at once. It's very varied, and because we're quite a small team, I've had the opportunity to work on projects way outside my areas of expertise. So for instance, at the moment, I'm helping a rugby organisation to design and run a programme for women who want to become leaders in the sports sector. It's also a nice balance between the benefits of working in the charity sector and the benefits of working in the corporate sector. So the pay is a bit better, and there's perks like a healthcare plan and more opportunities for development and progression. I've obviously come into this role with quite a strong charity background, but I do have several colleagues who've come straight from uni into working at Oaks. So it isn't necessarily required to get into a consultancy role. So that is a quick overview of my career path. I'm really glad that I joined the charity sector. You meet amazing people and get such a great deal of satisfaction from knowing that the work you're doing is making a difference. My main advice for anyone thinking about working in this career is just to go for it. There's lots of opportunities in the charity sector at the moment, particularly at the entry level and practitioner level, and it is a candidate's market. The sector needs new blood and new ideas, and I would say it is more open than ever to bringing in people who may not have that direct experience of a particular area. It really does help if you have some charitable experience on your CV, whether that's doing a bit of volunteering, being a trustee, or even just raising money yourself for a good cause. Ultimately, though, as I've said throughout, good fundraising is about good written and verbal communication and relationship building. And that's where your degree and your extracurricular activities can really showcase your skills in that area. And that's it from me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Right. So I've been making a note of some kind of shared themes. We do have a burning question in the chat, which is, Charlotte, have you ever met Larry the cat?
Can confirm, have met Larry. He's probably one of the most reliable inhabitants of number 10 Downing Street in recent years.
Absolutely. He's an old man at this now. Right. Any other questions? Please do put in here. So one of the kind of main themes, and it's hard to think that the pandemic could actually be a positive change, but it seems to me that in recent years, in the various sectors that you're working in, that it seems like there's more understanding about flexibility. And Ellen, like you were saying, you don't necessarily need to have to be quite as London based. And so, yeah, location seems to be an important theme, but also that maybe things are opening up a little bit. Yeah, is this partly a digital thing, or is this just because everyone's been used to home working now? So there's that as one kind of thing to kind of think. Another issue, I think, was resilience. Like all of you have been describing different kind of pitfalls that have happened in your careers, and that you just have to keep trying, right? So Lucy was talking about having her eyes on going to Sage, Gateshead, and constantly reapplying, even though getting knockbacks. Charlotte, you two moving, had just talked about redundancy in one sector and retraining. And even Ellen, I know you said that you're in the charity sector, but you have moved around in quite a couple of them. So yeah, I'd say like keeping going. Yeah. Any other kind of thoughts from the floor about this? What did you think about each other's talks? Did you recognise anything? Oh, I can see Kathy's hand is up. Kathy.
I mean, I was really, really struck by the resilience, and I just wondered if you could share actually how did you keep picking yourselves back up and sort of putting yourself back out there? Are there any sort of tips you'd share with our audience?
I guess I would say it's important not to let people take the piss, because they will. Don't be doing work for free when you really ought to be paid for it, but also don't close your mind to opportunities because it's not the perfect thing or exactly what you want to do. I think it's important to think that everything is kind of a stepping stone that leads you to somewhere else. So, if you're offered an opportunity that is maybe not exactly what you want to do, if you can go in and you can do that role well, there might be another opportunity within that firm that is then perfect for you. And because you then have the contacts, you've met people, they've seen that you're a hard worker, it then makes it so much easier for you to move across to that role. So I think don't be blinkered into sort of, oh, I want to do exactly this thing. Say yes to opportunities, but don't, as much as you can, don't say, I mean, we've all had to do unpaid work experience, right? But, there are lots of publications out there who will say, oh, it would be great for your CV if you were to write this 800-word article for us, and therefore we're not going to pay you. Well, no, we all need money to pay the rent and to pay our bills. So I would really hope that there are not too many publications that are going to expect you to write or do anything for nothing.
I would say from a charity perspective, having a network is so important. In charities, you're quite often part of a really small team, or you're a sole fundraiser, or you're the only person who's based in your region. So your colleagues might be quite geographically dispersed. And actually being able to talk to someone else about the challenges you're facing, the setbacks, what's working, what's not working, makes a really big difference. And, you know, being able to say to someone like, oh, we applied to such and such grant and we didn't get it. And they go, oh, neither did we. Yeah, we've heard it's super competitive this year. Or they say, actually, we did get it. And you can kind of do some picking of their brain and seeing, oh, what could we do differently next time? And I think the more people you know and the more sort of networked up you are to be able to have those kinds of just drop in coffee catch-ups or whatever it is, makes a really, really big difference in kind of helping you to keep going on those days when it feels like things are getting quite tough.
Thank you so much. I think it sounds to me like having it's something that you gain as you go further on in a career, I guess. But having the confidence to ask questions and to be open to so we think of networking as if it's a sort of a schmoozing thing, but actually this is being able to network, like talk to people in your sector. And actually something that, you know, before you even go on to a certain career path, maybe one of those contacts is the career services. So, you know, you were talking a little bit, Ellen, about how being able to go to the career services in your university helped. But it's not just for trying to identify what career you want to do, but even things like training, mock interviews. So yeah, I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that, or Charlotte, if you'd had any experiences, and Lucy, if you're still able to connect to us from the train, that would be great if we could hear from you too.
Yeah, I found it really useful. I think I was in a good position that I was able to go in and say, right, I've identified this career and I think I want to go into it. Where do I start? And they were great at kind of signposting me to different resources and different connections. And they did link me up, as I said, with a specific mentor who was a huge, huge help to me. And I think that's it, is that, you know, there's absolutely loads of alumni like me and Charlotte and Lucy and others who are really happy to help and want to kind of, you know, give people that knowledge that we've got, or that little leg up, or be part of their network and be able to share our experience in bits. So, you know, I know that there's a whole volunteer database that they are holding on to. So, you know, that we are here to help essentially. And, you know, if anyone wants to connect with me on LinkedIn after this, very welcome to, and ask me questions, whatever would be useful. But I found the career service was great at just kind of bridging that gap for me and just helping me to get my foot in the door a little bit.
The career service is also really good at helping you to write a CV, and also explaining different types of CVs, because you might be thinking, you know, I've got lots of different experiences. I don't know how best to present what I've done and how it shows what I could do. So I found they were really good at, you know, explaining the difference between a kind of standard CV where you just list a load of stuff that you've done, and a sort of skills-based CV where you can really highlight the skills that you've gained from particular, not just employment, but also other experiences.
We have a question in the chat. I know that we're coming up to 3 p.m, but I thought I could just ask this. This would be for Charlotte, and if the answer's not that quick, then maybe we can put some advice later. So we've got from Isabel Wright, I'm studying English literature, second year, interest in journalism is, and it would be something that she thinks she'd be strong in. What kind of work opportunities do you know? Are things like starting a personal blog or writing articles a good way of gaining some of that experience? So I guess that's sort of private. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Absolutely, start writing for the student newspaper if you're not doing that already, and see if, you know, you can get something published in any other newspapers. Make sure you get a name credit, and also, as I said before, try and get paid for it. I don't know anything specifically about newspapers or magazines. The best thing I can do is write to everyone you can find. Be absolutely shameless. Find people's emails. They always exist on websites or on the back of magazines or newspapers. newspapers, just write those emails because it costs you nothing. The worst thing that can happen is they say no, and that's not the end of the world.
So to keep asking questions, and also I think, and this is for all of the people we've heard, to value the work that you're doing, to be flexible about it, but yeah, not to have people take the piss. I think it was a useful one. Okay, it's 3 o'clock. I can see we've got another question for Charlotte. What I might suggest is that we're going to be coming back at 3:30 to start up. Should we stick around to ask this question now, Charlotte? Yes, and then if there are more things, we can always come back to this at the end. But right, so from Paul, so this is about freelancing in journalism, and so this might also be something for Alan and for Lucy to maybe think about freelancing in art sectors and media. I've always been worried about the emphasis on freelancing in journalism. I don't know how relevant it is to you because you've been employed at the BBC, but how would you sort of overcome, I guess, the fact that for the most part, journalism as a career is moving more to freelancing? Has there been a lack of non-self-imposed deadlines, been an obstacle given that deadline focus was something that you shared?
So I'll take the question about freelancing. As I say, I have not done really any freelance work, so it might be something that Lucy can better pick up on, but certainly there is a move towards that, but it's not all a kind of negative thing that people don't want to give permanent contracts anymore, but it's also a thing that some people are choosing because they want, like Lucy was saying, to be able to choose to work on the things that they really care about. You know, they want to be able to pick and choose projects that they think are valuable and that they want to spend their time doing. So I think you can see that as a positive as well. As a freelancer, you know, if you want to do it, you can still get union representation. I would say the National Union of Journalists absolutely represents freelancers and has a separate payment structure. So you can still get support from that means, and they also put on courses that you can go on as well. I would say if you want to do freelancing, you definitely have to be good at self-advocating. You know, you are going to have to go out there and hustle for work in a way that you don't necessarily have to when you sort of have a full-time contracting situation. But it's definitely something that maybe some people do at the start of their career as a way to get into the thing they want to do, but also at the end of their career so that they can pick and choose more of what they want to do as well.
Yeah, so at those sort of points where you're starting and ending, it gives flexibility, but there are different points of our life when we maybe want more, not so much flexibility, but security. And that's something that, yeah, is the counter side. But yeah, thanks so much, Charlotte. Okay, so if we have, we've got from Jos, who's from our career services here at Newcastle. Following on from Ellen's comments about connecting with helpful alumni at Sheffield, yes, we've got a link for our students here as well. And we're going to be sharing, so if this is for everyone's sort of information, we'll be sharing various links that we've kind of been collecting together from our career services across Newcastle and Sheffield University, along with this video for later. And I'm thinking that if speakers, because you were talking about accredited kind of accredited courses and unions and things, it might be worth us asking if you can send us links that you have that have been useful contacts for you in your career, and that would be something that students who are considering following that career path might look into at the very beginning too. That might be something we can do. Okay, thanks everyone. I know this overran a bit. We will come back at 3:30 for our final panel in the kind of unexpected job careers for English graduates. Thank you very much to Lucy, to Charlotte and to Ellen for speaking on a really, really inspiring panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlotte, Ellen, Lucy. You were great. Really appreciate your time and your insights. Thanks, everyone. So yeah, just to reiterate, there'll be a break now until past. If you don't want to hear the kind of clunky welcoming of the next set of speakers, then just mute your speakers for the break, and we'll see you later.
You can hang on, Liam.
So I'll just introduce Liam again. It's Liam Humes, who is a digital product owner at the NatWest Group.
Hello, thanks, Kathy, and thanks for the introduction. So yes, a little bit about me first and kind of what degree I did, and I'll tell you about what I do now and also the journey and on how I got here and kind of my thoughts about that along the way. So I studied at the University of Sheffield, and I studied English language and literature, graduating in 2017, which is a couple of years ago now, but actually does not feel that long ago. I think possibly because we had the lockdown in between, which kind of put things on hold. But yeah, doesn't seem so long ago, and I definitely still miss Sheffield an awful lot. I now live in Manchester, which is not too far away. So my current job, what I do now, as you've said, I work for the NatWest Group. So this is the banking group that owns, of course, NatWest and also the Royal Bank of Scotland, Ulster Bank, and also the commercial banks, Coutts and Lombard, amongst others. And my role there is as a product owner, which is in the digital banking and technology area of the business. For those who aren't familiar with the product owner role, which I don't think I was before I joined the organisation, I'll just explain a little bit about what that is and kind of what my role entails. So essentially, I work as a manager or project manager, if you like, for the mobile banking app. So therefore, myself and my team are responsible for making updates to the NatWest and our branded banking apps, which gets updated in the Apple Store and the Google Store on a monthly basis. So it's a very fast-paced world of work, and it's all digital based. So we're constantly updating, as you can imagine, with new products, new features, keeping up with our competitors, and keeping up with things like the cost of living crisis and things that our customers will need at their fingertips. So it's a real fast-paced job. My role as part of this team, it's to work with the different stakeholders around the business in terms of understanding what those changes are and the features that we want to implement, and communicating that to the software developers. So I'm kind of in between the business and who hold the budgets and the requirements and the software developers, and I own that product at that kind of funnel point. So personally, I own, or I'm responsible for, is probably the best way to phrase it, the AI chatbot. So I own Cora, which is the name of the chatbot that NatWest has, and also the budgeting and spending features within the app too. So I work with stakeholders from around the business, I work with software developers, and my job really is to align the strategy and align the vision and business objectives to make everybody's goals really clear. My job is to facilitate the conversation, to manage that project. And as you can imagine, it's like a constant conveyor belt of work, with it being new screen designs, change requests, copy changes, and there can be complex changes or small changes that come through on a constant basis. So as I say, I communicate that to the software developers who do the coding, the really tricky stuff that blows my mind, and I see it through from idea to delivery, through pilot and then through to live, which is when customers get their hand on it. And I think we've got around 10 million customers using the app, so it's really tangible results too, is what probably my favourite part of the job. How did I get on this path, and where did I go after graduating from university? Towards the end of my undergrad degree there at the School of English, I still didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I did know that I fancied working in the private sector and trying my hand at something in the corporate world, whatever that meant to me at the time. And I actually used the career services at the university to explore things like scholarships and what funding would be available. And I'm pleased to say I was able to obtain a scholarship at that time to continue my education at the University of Sheffield, which was just amazing news. So I actually then undertook a postgraduate course at the business school in Sheffield, which was in marketing management practice. So I felt that marketing was a good stepping stone between business and English. And although I don't work in the marketing role now, I feel that gave me a little bit of a helping hand into understanding the corporate world a little bit more. I actually joined NatWest Group via a graduate scheme. So I joined on it was Royal Bank of Scotland at the time. We've now rebranded to NatWest Group, but I joined on the grad programme, which I feel was, I was really proud to get that. It's probably my proudest achievement because I'm still at NatWest now. It's the only job I've had post-university, and I'm still here a couple of years later. My advice about those grad schemes, as many people will know, is you need to apply so early. I was surprised that I was applying for these jobs 12 months before the start date, and that's just how it works with the graduate programs. So I'd applied for that with my English undergraduate degree, and I undertook my postgraduate study between finishing my English degree and starting that my job with the Royal Bank of Scotland 12 months later. So I was still studying and finishing my degree but I already knew that I'd secured the place to start in the September. So yeah, I think using the services at the university and speaking to people about my career options was really beneficial to me at that time and helped me on that journey. What made me decide on this career? I'll be honest, banking is not something that I'd ever dreamed of or imagined. And I think that's because as an English graduate, I personally hadn't imagined that something like that would be possible to me. As I say, I wanted to have a corporate job, but also have something that I felt I could have a degree of creativity and use some of those skills and the passions that I had. So yeah, I applied for loads and loads of grad schemes. Almost every graduate scheme you can think of I applied for. I really encourage you to just go for it and apply for as many as you can, because it's highly competitive and you only need one kind of chance to get in there, and that's what I got with NatWest. So I was really pleased about that. How did my experience at uni help me? So kind of what skills do I draw upon? It really did help me to have an English degree, and I think it's still something that sets me apart now. So I work with a lot of technology people, and I'm speaking extremely generally here, but a lot of people who work in tech or in coding don't always have the best communication skills, and I feel that's what sets me apart within the business, is having that ability to speak to stakeholders and communicate with people. I work from home mostly, and I'm on Zoom all the time, but I think speaking to people and being able to understand their goals and their objectives and align them to other people's goals and objectives, communication is key in that, and not everybody has those soft skills, which I feel you have as an English student. Also in my role within mobile, everybody wants something in mobile. It's a real fast-paced area of the bank. The prioritization roadmap is chock-a-block that, to get a change in is really competitive within the teams within the bank. So part of my role is, how do I take the stakeholders on that journey with me in terms of understanding the rest of the backlog and what needs to be prioritized. I need to kind of flex my communication style depending on who I'm speaking to and what their objectives are. And yeah, just generally keep stakeholders engaged so that every box is ticked along the way and I can safely deliver something into the mobile app to millions of customers, without any risks and without any bugs, etc. Another part of my job, I think, which my English degree has massively helped with, is it's translating business needs within the technology teams and back to the business side of NatWest. So I work with a wide range of stakeholders talking about the same topic, but sometimes in vastly different ways, whether it's from a technological perspective and thinking about the coding, or thinking more about how it will look and feel for the customer and what we want the feel of the app to be. I can have those conversations about the same topic, but speak in very different ways. So a large part of my job is translating those business needs, if you like, between the different areas that I work with. Another part of it, I think, is utilizing multiple streams of communication. So to bring people together, I use Teams, I use Skype, Messenger, I use Zoom, emails, face-to-face, we use Slack Messenger. There's so many forms of digital communication these days that I genuinely feel that my English degree and having that kind of touch on communication is really beneficial in me keeping on track of that and understanding what needs to be done next. I love that my job is fast-paced. My favorite part about it is having tangible results. So as I mentioned, we're delivering on a monthly basis to millions of customers, and often part of that I've owned and seen through from end to end. So I really enjoy seeing those tangible results and knowing that customers have a real benefit from the work that I've put in. And just to kind of finish and kind of conclude this part, what advice would I give to my younger self is another question that I thought would be useful to share. And for me, it would be something personal along the lines of not to put limitations on myself around what I think is possible and not to have that imposter syndrome. I've realized, and I'm only early in my career, but I've already realized that everybody's got to start somewhere. And when you get your foot in the door and get into a room that you thought you couldn't get into, I found at every step that everybody's been extremely friendly and extremely welcoming. And I think when I was younger, at least, I was daunted that there were rooms that maybe I didn't fit into or wouldn't belong in. And I've not found that to be the case. So my advice to myself would be, go for it, put yourself out there. And also, don't pretend to be someone that you're not. I don't feel I have to wake up every morning and pretend that I'm on The Apprentice or anything like that. I genuinely feel I can be myself at work and bring the best to that role and bring something a bit unique that not everybody has because of the background that I have in studying English. I will leave it there, Kathy, if that's okay, and hand back to you. I know we're on a schedule and happy to take questions later.
Thank you so much, Liam. That was great and really helpful, and good to know that you can be in the commercial world, and not be like on The Apprentice. That's a really useful. So I'm now going to move on to Alex Keane, who is Head of Communications and Marketing at Sent into Space. So over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Kathy. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex. I studied English and philosophy at Sheffield University from 2009 to 2012. And I now work at a company called Sent into Space, which is a high altitude launch company who conduct stratospheric balloon launches to the upper stratosphere for all sorts of applications, not including spying for the Chinese government. So we do scientific research work, we do educational work with schools, we do aerospace component testing, but we also do cinematography, marketing activations for big companies, marketing stunts. And there's even a side of the business which is under the brand name Aura Flights, which is an ashes scattering service. So we scatter ashes in space 100,000 feet above the Earth. My role within the business, as I said, I'm the head of communications and marketing. So all of our kind of websites, we have the Sent into Space website, we have the Aura Flights website, the Ashes scattering service. So I manage those, our social media feeds, any marketing activations that we do for ourselves, but also when marketing agencies come to us and they have a big client, like it might be YouTube, or it might be Fall Guys, or it might be a small company who have an internal marketing department, come to us and say, we want to do some kind of marketing activation in space. I work with the sales team as well to come up with ideas and proposal documents for clients who are interested in that as well. And so that's quite a broad job, quite a weird job. And my I didn't exactly get into this job by normal routes, traditional routes. When I left university, I really didn't have a plan of what I was doing. I wish I'd been as forward thinking as Liam, because I did not realize that you had to apply to graduate schemes 12 months before you finished your degree. And so I left university and I started working at Hallam FM, at the local radio station. I was interested in getting into intermedia, into working on radio, and I started out volunteering for their Christmas charity campaign, helping, absolutely nothing to do with English. I used that as a way of getting into, making connections and finding work doing, on supporting the marketing team. And at that point, I was cold calling businesses, inviting them to come to marketing seminars. And that did not last very long. I spent about a year and a half working at the Home Office through a temp agency, which was really, really valuable, kind of getting experience of the public sector, of working in a massive organization. And then I moved back to radio, working for Sheffield Live, which is another local radio TV station, working with their marketing team, getting people advertising on the radio, writing and creating adverts for clients on the radio. And that collapsed quite quickly on me, because it's a local radio station. And one piece of advice I would have is that radio is a very difficult industry to make a career in. And then I spent 2 or 3 years working in administration for a distribution company. And so my route into Sent into Space started because I was looking for something that was more kind of aligned with using my English degree. I discovered a scheme that was being run by the university both the universities in Sheffield and Sheffield City Council and Sheffield City Chamber of Commerce, called RISE, which was a kind of graduate and kind of a graduate employment scheme. And I applied for a job at a marketing agency, a creative agency. Spent a few months going back and forth with them, going on several interviews. I went from one of, I think over 100 candidates down to the last 3. And then they said, thanks, we're going with someone else. And I went, great, okay. And then I called up the RISE scheme and said, hi, I feel like I've just spent a long time chasing down a job. What else is going on in Sheffield? And they went, well, there's this one company that that were too late to get in on the scheme, but I don't know if it'd be, they're sort of a space agency. And I went, what? Yeah, they need someone to write bid applications for funding. And I said, great, put me in touch. And that was 6 years ago. And so I joined at the point where the company was very small. They were hiring for someone to write funding applications, and they thought someone with an English degree would be useful for that, because they wanted someone to help them persuade the government to give them money to fund their work. And my role has grown with the company, developing into using my skills to handle all sorts of creative aspects of the business's communications and marketing. And now I manage a little team. So I have a kind of full-time copywriting position under me, creating blog content, creating articles, helping to write with proposal documents. And I also work closely with the kind of digital marketing side of the business. So we have an in-house social media, SEO analytics person who's a lot more data oriented. And I work with him, gaining insights into, well, what is our kind of web traffic looking like? What are people searching to find us? What keywords can we be targeting, and translating those into blog posts? So in a way, it's a very traditional marketing role. And in other ways, I've got fingers in all different pies across the business. So working with a small engineering business is really interesting. It's incredibly varied, and working in a small business, a small company, from the start is both a blessing and a curse. You can learn a lot if you join a small company, you have a lot of opportunity to make a role for yourself, and build something from scratch. I've worked with the director of the company to develop a marketing strategy and to develop the identity of the company's brand, our YouTube presence. We're coming up on 100,000 YouTube subscribers, and we're working with some of the world's biggest content creators as well. Equally, in a small business, you don't have a huge amount of support. I am the only person in the company with an English degree, with any kind of experience, and the experience that I had of marketing was working in radio when I started here. So I've spent a lot of time solving problems that have already been solved in other businesses, and kind of fighting to create a role for myself and shift the direction of my role. So that's a bit of background on me. Having studied an English and philosophy degree, I think, has been really useful. Everyone talks about the soft skills, the communications, the ability to communicate is so vital in all sorts of business applications. And as Liam said, when we live in a world where so much communication happens over digital mediums, that is more important than ever, being able to communicate with your colleagues, not just for your success professionally, for your ability to get tasks done, but also for your ability to work with other people. Everyone knows someone who can't send a text and just somehow manages to phrase it by putting a full stop in the wrong place. Picking up on that kind of the changing modes of communication and communicating effectively is vital for interpersonal relationships in the workplace. The skills that I learned writing essays at university absolutely have translated into professional copywriting. Being able to present quite complex ideas in a coherent and compelling way for a non-technical audience is really important to the work that Sentence Space does. When I started, it was impenetrable what the company did from their website. You know, a group of engineers were not the right people to sell engineering services or communicate to the press why some achievement that they had, some, you know, world first technical feat that they had accomplished should be celebrated. And on the kind of creative side, you know, working on social media, creating blog articles, working to create ideas for campaigns for our potential clients. The process of studying literature, of analyzing text, of breaking down and interpreting things in different ways lends itself so well to coming up with creative ideas, different angles for how you can make something compelling. If you're working in a digital marketing role and somebody goes, hey, so here's this keyword, we really need to incorporate this particular keyword into a blog post. And you go, okay, well, what do you want me to write about? And they go, well, that keyword. It's up to you to find a way to make that interesting. Ultimately, I think the study of literature is partly a study of empathy, which is so vital in communication. Being able to put yourself in your audience's shoes, work out what they care about, how to make them care about what you're saying, is about empathy, is about understanding what will sway people and what will persuade people. And so that's really vital. So I'm sure we'll have time for questions later. I'm gonna try and wrap things up, but my advice on finding a career and taking English into the world of work, firstly would be, I did not do a great job of leaving university and going into the working world, and now I run a department at a really cool, weird company. So if you muck it up and you haven't been applying for grad schemes for the last 6 months, you've not blown it forever. Like there's hope out there. Take advantage of the opportunities that are around, and keep an eye out for them. Use the resources that university offer. They are great. I did not take good enough advantage of them while I was at university, but also courses, other kind of, there are always these different schemes and graduate opportunities coming up, like the RISE scheme, and just calling up and going, hey, this didn't work out for me, but I really valued being there. What else is going on is what led me into this job. As someone who's now hiring for copywriters and you know, creative people, anyone can learn to write copy that will incorporate the right search engine keywords for a digital marketing thing. Anyone can come along and, well, I say anyone, not anyone in fact can write a coherent sentence, but many people can write a coherent sentence. But what sets people apart is showing their personality in their work. And that also translates to CVs and cover letters. When you're applying for jobs, the temptation is to look for a formula of how to write a good cover letter and Google 50 examples and then go, right, okay, I'm going to do that really well. And that, you know, by all means, see what other people are doing, but showing your personality will mean that some jobs, someone will read your CV and go, right, I don't want this person. This person comes across weird. But without some of who you are, that is what sets you apart. That's what makes you memorable. And that is the kind of skill that will take you forward in your career as well. And I'll hand over.
Thank you very much, Alex. So do pop questions in the chat for both Liam and Alex, and then hopefully Rachel too, who is going to talk now. So Rachel Pratt is a conversation experience designer. So over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Kathy. Hi, everyone. Yes, so I work as a conversation experience designer within the artificial intelligence industry, and I can imagine people are probably wondering what that actually means. How do you design a conversation? So in the kind of most basic and relatable terms, I'm designing interfaces for all sorts of speech and language applications, whether that's chatbots, voice assistants, speech enabled devices, automated call systems, and things like that. So it's any sort of application really that you communicate with using either speech or a text input. And it's designing how the user interacts with that and how the system is going to respond back to the user to kind of create these natural and conversational applications that we use in our sort of day-to-day life. And I'll admit, I didn't know what that job was either when I was studying English language. And in fact, when I went to study English initially, I didn't really do so with an end career in mind. It was very much a decision of what I enjoyed and what I thought I would like to learn more about. And it pretty much stayed that way right through until I graduated. I didn't really have a clear-cut idea of what industry or sector or profession I wanted to be in. But I knew that I had enjoyed certain modules around kind of like syntax or phonology, natural language processing, and some of the more technical elements of my English language degree. So when I graduated, I knew that I wanted to kind of pivot a little bit into something more technical, but still very much based on sort of an English language element. So I actually took a year out and I worked for my university. It was Newcastle, actually, I should mention. And I worked for the university whilst I kind of figured out a little bit what my next step was. The most obvious thing for me to do at that point would be to go and do a master's in computer science, so that I could get a technical background and then figure out how to incorporate English language and my interests from my undergraduate degree into a profession within there. But I actually found whilst I was working for that year that this whole specialized sector called speech and language processing existed. And it's something that just had not come across to me during my undergraduate degree at all. And it was one of those moments where I was reading through sort of the course online and I was like, this is exactly what I wanted to do. I just didn't know it was a thing and I didn't know how to put it into words. So I applied for this master's up in Edinburgh. It was 1 year. And I have to admit, it was incredibly intensive. There was a lot of stuff on that course that I had never done before. It was very technical. There was a lot of coding, a lot of analytics. So it was tough going, but it was a really incredible experience. And actually, a lot of the people on that course came from a linguistics and language background. We made up the vast majority of people on there. So I think it's a really interesting thing to note that actually within this sector, which is really quite a technical area, people that come from English and linguistic backgrounds are really sort of leading the way and bringing some really good skills into it, which is something I think is great to note. So once I'd finished studying my master's degree up in Edinburgh, I actually went to Nuance, which is where I currently work now, and I've been there for just over 6 years. So Nuance is a speech and language company, and we do different applications for healthcare and enterprise solutions, and we used to do automotive as well. So lots of different kind of touch points of where you might interact with the system via speech or text. We're a relatively big company. When I joined, we were international. We're just quite under the hood, so we supply a lot of our technology to sort of high street names that you would know about. So a lot of people won't have heard of Nuance. I definitely hadn't either. But we have recently been acquired by Microsoft, which is a really exciting time for me in terms of starting to expand my career. And, you know, who knows what opportunities there'll be in a company, you know, as big as Microsoft and all the different things that they do as well. So I'm kind of excited to see where that leads going forward too. My favorite thing I would say about the role I do at the moment is just the fact that I interface with so many different people and so many different companies. And the majority of what I do is viewing problems from both sort of the business and the end user perspective in order to solve them. So I'll go out to a client that I'm working with to understand their business requirements, how their users interact with them, and what their users need from that business. And then I'll translate those into technical specifications that we then build and develop. So my job really crosses the barriers of being sort of more on the business side and looking at requirements, and then also developing these sort of artificial intelligence natural language systems as well. And it's being able to do both of those things within the one role that I really enjoy, and it keeps sort of my day-to-day really fresh and interesting. So in terms of things that I studied in English, or other things whilst I was at uni as well, actually, that prepared me for that career, were probably things like the modules I mentioned, like syntax, natural language processing. And I did some outside courses in my undergraduate as well in psychology. And that really helped to open my mind a little bit to the idea of speech processing and also user interactions. So thinking of it more from the like human-centered perspective, not just sort of the language and the technical element as well. So if you have opportunity to kind of take a course here and there in a complementary subject, then I think that can be a really nice thing just to get you viewing things from maybe a different perspective. And then obviously my master's kind of cemented all the technical knowledge and the coding elements and that side of things as well. The other thing I wanted to mention is that when I was at uni, I was quite active in a lot of different clubs and societies. And although that's not sort of strictly related to my English degree, being involved in that kind of university life element enabled me to meet like a really wide range of people. And in my role at work, I interact daily with such a huge array of people, from developers to quality assurance testers, speech scientists, project managers, other conversation designers, you name it. I'm probably going to be chatting to them at some point throughout the day. So the ability to kind of work with such a wide range of people and build relationships with people from all different backgrounds and from all different sort of education points as well is really key in the role that I do, I would say. I've mentioned already a little bit that I didn't really know who Nuance were before I started working for them, or what I wanted to do when I went to uni. And I think it's something that probably a lot of people who study English go through. I was really lucky that when I chose to study English, I was encouraged to do what I wanted to do at uni because I enjoyed it, not because it had this kind of set career path that was clear cut. And that definitely would be my advice to anyone going forward as well. I think it's so important to enjoy what you're doing, whether that's studying or whether it's in a career as well. And the majority of people assumed that I would become a teacher with an English degree. I'm sure a lot of people have also had that. And if you want to teach, then that's absolutely fine. But there is so much more out there that you can do with an English degree. And I know that from sort of just seeing what my peers have done after our English degree. And I hope that you guys are seeing this from the panel today as well, and hearing about sort of all the cool different areas that we're working in. So don't be disheartened if people ask you what you're planning to do and you're not sure. You will get there as long as you're enjoying the journey to it. Then I think that's the most important bit. Touching just on some skills directly from humanities that were helpful in my role. I'm actually going to kind of parrot a little bit of what Liam was saying earlier, and Alex, I think, touched on this as well, that the tech world can be full of people who are highly intelligent and very technically minded, but they're not always the best communicators of their ideas. And I think something a humanities degree gives you is that ability to interact with so many different people, convey your ideas clearly, and also be able to sort of analyze and critique the information coming to you before you pass it on as well. So I think that gives us such a huge step up in these sectors that are maybe less popular within humanities or English language, linguistics and literature degrees, because in my day-to-day I'm sort of communicating complex designs to non-technical people and then translating it into the same technical specification to give to a developer. And if I asked my developer to stand in front of my business contact and explain what they were doing, there's probably going to be a lot of crossed wires there, and it's going to take 10 times longer than it does if you've got someone who can sort of decode from one end and pass that on to the other and be that sort of middleman. So anything in your degree that you can get an opportunity to do, like presenting, analyzing and critiquing, attention to detail in like written assessments and stuff, I think is a huge advantage, and something that I know I sort of use every single day, and is something that is commented on by other people in the industry as well, as a really positive thing that not everyone is able to do. So really sort of play on that and make the most of it. So before I sort of finish up, and I think there's Q&A afterwards anyway, but I thought I'd also think about advice to my younger self. So I've mentioned it already, but I think the most important thing to me is to enjoy uni, enjoy what you're studying, try different things, and whatever you end up going into, whatever career path you decide you want to take, just make sure it's something that you are going to wake up every day and want to do, and it's something that you really enjoy, because I think that's the best way that you're going to perform, get job satisfaction, and also be able to use the skills that you've learned throughout your education as well. I think there are jobs that are going to be around in 5-10 years that we probably don't even know exist yet. I had no idea my job was a thing probably before my third year or master's even. So don't be worried if you don't know exactly what you want to do. There is so many options out there. So my advice would just to be go into things being curious and prepared to kind of give it a go. And who knows what you'll end up doing, but there's stuff out there that we probably don't even know yet. So don't stress about that too much. And yeah, I'll wrap up there before I harp on any longer. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was great. And thank you to everyone. So people do put questions in the chat. I think it's been really useful sort of to see, we began the day with a kind of more a theoretical approach to careers, and people like Jane Nolan, who I can still see on screen, sort of talking about the really useful attributes that English students have. And it's really great in this final panel to see how those are, you know, first-hand testimony of those in sort of areas that at first glance look really very remote from an English degree. So it's kind of proving what Jane was talking about. And also, so Gabby Binney earlier was talking about the way, and this particularly I think sort of course with you, Alex, about don't worry if your first steps out of university don't seem to be quite on the right path, that they are only first steps, you know, don't sweat it. You know, sort of some careers take a while to, you know, get where they end up, and that also has been resonating in the earlier panel as well. Sometimes there's a very wiggly route to get to a job that is satisfying. And yeah, sort of Kate de Rijkers mentioned that, yeah, we don't know what types of jobs are going to be out there in a few years. That also, we talked about the future of work in the very first panel as well. So it was good to hear you reflecting too on sort of the kind of similarities between your different fields, and it was very noticeable that translation came up in all of them, the translating between. I don't know if you would be able to reflect on actually how you learned the vocabulary in order to communicate across those very different audiences. Liam, do you want to go first?
I'm happy to give it a go. Yeah, it's a tricky question, and that's probably the biggest challenge I face in my role, actually, is that act of translating between my business stakeholders. It's exactly what you were talking about, Rachel. I feel we have quite similar roles. Communicating to my business stakeholders back to the software developers who will speak in much more technical language. I'm not skilled in coding. It's not something I've studied, and I'm not expected to be, but there's an element of explaining things very clearly and simply. And something that we use in my business is an acceptance criteria, which I will provide to the software developers, which very clearly explains in bullet point form of this is what my expectation is, build it, and then they kind of come back and check that it's correct. So I found that generally speaking, software developers will build exactly what I ask for and nothing else, because that's the way that they get it exactly right. So it's so important that I clearly understand the business, understand their vision almost, and explain that in a real concise way in bullet point format for the technology contacts that I speak to. How did I pick that up? I think it was just practice makes perfect, and not being overwhelmed when the conversation goes over my head. And a tip I use sometimes with people speaking technically is to say something like, can you explain that in a different way for me? I'm not quite picked that up. Can you explain that from a different angle, or can you illustrate it for me in a diagram, perhaps, if it's a flow of data or something like that? So bringing it back is probably how I best use a visual way, or thinking about things from different angles. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask people if you don't understand.
Thanks, Liam. Alex, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the kind of research skills that I picked up during my degree have served me well. Like exercising curiosity about other people's departments and other people's roles is really vital. And working with I work with an engineering department who create spacecraft. And so asking, like translating from their technical challenges into stuff that I can then, turn into a blog post or explain to a client why this is a technical feat that they should pay us loads of money to do, is about going down and having that conversation and really taking a position of, embracing my position of ignorance about it and asking as many questions as possible and really enjoying the process of finding that out. And the same is true with the, we have a kind of in-house videography graphic design team working with designers or working with website developers when we've revamped the company website. Some of that has been me in my own time, like going and learning some of the basics of that field. What are the principles of design? What are the kind of considerations of web development? But I think that certainly in the engineering world, which is a very can be a very kind of male dominated and masculinized environment, there's a reluctance for people to seem like they don't know something. And yeah, so to echo Liam, like being okay with not knowing and asking is really vital.
That's great, thanks. And that really kind of connects with something that was coming up in the very first presentation about humanities students being much more used to uncertainty. So it's sort of coming full circle again. Rachel, have you got anything to add about translation?
Yeah, I think the point on sort of don't be afraid to ask questions or ask someone to explain it or show you a different way, I completely agree with. I think for me, a lot of the translation probably came sort of from working on the job, because a lot of the terms are quite obviously specific to maybe the company or the technology you're working with. So I think on top of being confident to ask questions and ask for clarification is also really being open to feedback. So if you've had a meeting with a customer and you had a colleague in there with you, ask them, how did they think it went? Or if you feel like someone didn't understand your explanation very well, ask a colleague if they've got a better way they could have explained it, or if you've got ideas you can bounce off each other. I think being open to feedback from especially sort of my senior colleagues who've been doing the role for a lot longer than I have is really valuable for sort of learning new ways to communicate that maybe they've trialed and errored already. So yeah, I think being open to that feedback and you might not always get it right first time, but as long as you're willing to listen to that feedback and give it a go next time, then you get there in the end.
Great, thanks, Rachel. We've got a question from Hannah. I've noticed a general emphasis from all the speakers today to get involved, be it societies, clubs, volunteering, etc. Obviously, this has been extremely tricky over the last few years. So is there an alternative that we can emphasize in terms of interviews and CV writings? Is this where a skills-based CV would come in? Any thoughts as people who are getting to the position where you might be employing people, how you might recognize the kind of hiatus that's been caused by the pandemic on the normal sort of university experience? So
I can jump in. So I'm currently looking to hire another copywriter at Centered Space. You can find the advert on Indeed if anyone's looking. Like seeing people's interests is as valuable as their almost as valuable as like in-person experience of societies and clubs. And obviously, like everyone's aware that that's been more difficult over the past couple of years. And seeing examples of things that people have done in their spare time, writing wise. I mean, writing can be a can be a solo activity. So maintaining some kind of portfolio of work, and that doesn't have to be, you know, anything relevant to business, just being able to demonstrate that you have, you know, have a passion for and a motivation to create is really valuable. So yeah, I encourage people to write for the sake of writing, and that is something that you can demonstrate and doesn't require you to go outside at all. We can all live in our little huts.
There's a suggestion's also been put in the chat about there are virtual internships that you can do. So again, going back to sort of another theme that's been going on about the importance and the value of the careers services that universities have, both whilst you're a student, but also there's the kind of afterwards as well, you can return to them. There's a question about how you keep up motivation in terms of career path goals. And this was something I was noticing across the day, is the value that all of the kind of postgraduate speakers about variety in their jobs. So it's like sort of the kind of questioner says that it would be very easy to, I feel it would be very easy to settle and end up stuck in a job that you don't really enjoy just to keep the paycheck ticking over, rather than putting the extra effort to keep growing, as it can feel draining sometimes. So yes, how is it you keep up the self-motivation to keep chasing that rewarding job?
I'll jump in if that's okay, just a little feedback. So I think a couple of things for me spring to mind here. The first is sometimes when I was at uni, even starting into my career, I would think, God, wouldn't it be great to have a job where I didn't really have to do that much and I still got paid for it, and I could relax all day, probably send a few emails, and, you know, it's not really that tasking. When it comes to it, it's actually not that fun to sit around doing nothing, and you do grow tired of it pretty easily, which gives you a kick up to behind, I shall say, to try and look for something that's a bit more fulfilling. And the other thing I would say is that I don't think motivation is a straight upwards trajectory like this. It undulates, and I imagine, although I'm relatively new in my career, I imagine that is how it stays. So for sort of the second to fourth years of my career, I pushed really hard for promotions, for more experiences, and then I got to where I sort of wanted to be at my next step, and I thought, actually this year for me is about taking my foot off the gas a little bit, actually enjoying where I am now, and maybe having a bit more time outside of work for doing, you know, social and fun things that I enjoy, hobbies, whatever it may be. And then after you've had that step back, I think you naturally tend to come back to a point where you're like, okay, I'm kind of ready to push that a little bit further again. So I just wanted to say, I think it would be completely natural for that to undulate over the course of your career. I think it's probably unrealistic for someone to be permanently striving and pushing for the next best thing. And it's okay to just kind of enjoy where you're at the moment, as long as you're, you know, sort of happy with what you're doing, then enjoy it for a little while and then see what your next step is.
Thanks, Rachel. Liam or Alex, do you want to add anything to that?
I can do, yeah. I can jump in, and I agree with everything you've said there, Rachel. I think for me personally, and I imagine with most people in this audience, that I enjoy learning, and it's something that I never want to stop doing. And I'm constantly learning in my role. I think if I got to a point where I felt pretty stagnant, or I'd given everything I could, that would give me the motivation that I needed to explore something else. But my tip would just be, even if it's a small side hustle or a passion of yours, just keep it going. And it's something that's one won't hand to you, but you can do for yourself, to kind of give you that motivation that there's light at the end of the tunnel, almost, in terms of if you're not enjoying what you're doing right now. And another thing for me in how I got motivation was just by speaking to as many people as possible. I didn't set out with a job in mind that I ended up getting, and I had that sense of who I've done it. I still feel I'm on that learning path and growing and finding jobs that I don't know exist yet. And I might speak to somebody and think, I'd love to give that a go, and I didn't know anything about it before. So approaching people and picking their brains on what they do is a really good way, just to, even if you afterwards you think, gosh, that sounds dreadful, I'd never want to do that, at least you've taken something from it. So yeah, don't be afraid to approach people. And a tip I have for that is that phrase I just used, which has always worked for me, is can I pick your brains on something? People love to talk about themselves, Exhibit A, and you know, and people find it easy to talk about the work that they do because they're passionate and it's the world that they're living in. So yeah, approach people and just say, can I pick your brains on what you do? I find it really interesting, and most people will open up to you and give you some advice. So yeah, putting yourself out there, I think.
Thanks, Liam. Do you want to add anything, Alex?
I think the other two have hit the nail on the head. Yeah.
Excellent. I'm conscious that we've worked our speakers really hard. So one final question. It's from Elizabeth. What would the graduates say to young people? Sorry, I've lost the chat. I've lost it. What would graduates say to young people undecided about taking an English A-level and being pulled towards different non-art subjects? So how would you bring them back to the light, I think is the message there. Alex, you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, I'll dive in. So I work with a lot of worked with a lot of engineers. I'm engaged to an engineer. Many of my friends are engineers. I love engineers. They're great people. But I know far more people who chose their A-levels based on the optimal path to get into a particular career, and go, oh God, I wish I'd done something. Like, I wish I'd done something that was a bit more, you know, creative, or that, like, you know, that I didn't have to force myself through that narrow channel to get to where I wanted to be, you know, to this dream of a career, than people who studied English and went, oh God, I wish I hadn't studied English, and really pushed hard to become an engineer. And obviously there's some selection bias in that, but if the thing that's holding you back from English is the idea that there is this optimal set of results that you have to get in certain subjects to pursue a particular pathway in life, then that, you know, that's a difficult choice to make, but you don't have to stick to the perfect track. I also know plenty of engineers who, you know, did physics, maths, chemistry, and something else at AS that wasn't the other science. You know, there's always scope to pursue something that you have a genuine passion in, and more often than not, you know, that's the thing that will make you stand out from everybody else.
Thanks, Alex. Rachel or Liam, do you want to jump in and give some advice to people choosing their A-levels?
Yeah, I think I'm harping on about it, but I think I would pick based on the stuff you're going to enjoy, because that's what you're probably going to want to put the effort in and work on. And echoing what Alex said, I did a really bit of an eclectic mix, actually. At A-levels, I did English, psychology, biology, and textiles. And it actually has been a talking point in quite a few interviews I've done. People have said, oh, I see you did textiles at A-levels. That's really interesting. We don't often see that mix. You know, they want to know why I chose that. Did I get anything out of it? That kind of thing. So yeah, don't be afraid to kind of have a mix of both, I think, humanities and more science-based, if you want to call it that, subjects. I think keeping your sort of options open at A-levels can be a good thing.
Thanks, Rachel. Liam?
Similar thing from me, really. The reason I picked English is for those reasons. I wanted to keep my options open, as it were. I think it's so difficult at the age of, 15, 16, to decide where the rest of your career is going to take you. And I think, as most people probably don't know, if you don't know right then that you want to be a surgeon or an astronaut or something extremely specialist, I can't think of a better option than English or humanities subject, because it makes you a well-rounded person. And I think even in the corporate world, which I work in, the skills of empathy and understanding other people is so valuable, and so many people are lacking it, and it's what makes you stand out. So for those reasons, I would definitely go with down the English or humanities route. And another reason is, don't pick science or maths or technology just because you think there's money there, and there might not be money in English. You know, it's when you're picking your kind of career focus, because I don't think that's true either. I think it's down to each individual and which industry you get into. And generally speaking, with an English degree, I felt I could get into most industries with that kind of generalist knowledge and skills that I bring.
Thank you very much, Liam. And I mean, I actually, graduated from English degree, and there were people who went into medicine post their English lit degrees. So even medicine is not barred to you. They have to do some substantial retraining. Yeah. There was another question in the chat, which about whether PhDs could be a stumbling block to a career outside academia. I'll answer that for you, just to say absolutely not. Having done a PhD in a humanities subject, you have demonstrated your ability to showcase all these skills. And Becky, who is here for the English Association, has an English degree and is now a CEO. So there you go. So definitely, yes, if you want to do the PhD, it can take you to different careers and sort of show the skills that you've got. I'm really conscious that we've worked, Alex, Liam, Rachel, really hard. So thank you so much for your time and your useful advice, and for kind of really showcasing what people have been talking about sort of earlier in the day. Audience, I'm really conscious that you've been here. Yeah, big clap. But audience, I'm really conscious that you've been here for a long time too. So the kind of roundup session is going to be very, very quick. Archie, Kate and I are just going to say a couple of things that have each struck us over the course of the day. Then we'll invite anyone else if they want to sort of share anything. To reiterate that the recording will be available on the English Association website. You'll get an email to say when it's available, and we'll also share some other resources there as well. So I'll kick off and sort of just a thing that struck me about today was, I suppose, about many of the shared things that went across the panels. And one of those is not being afraid of putting yourself out there, of sort of making connections, using networks, whether that's networks with people sort of senior to you or your peers. The value of a kind of peer support network is really valuable too. Archie, shall I hand over to you?
Sure. So yeah, I've been really struck by some of the shared themes as well, especially the idea of transferable skills. And I think this afternoon has been a really conclusive proof that these transferable skills are real, and increasingly useful and required in our economy. So some of the skills that have come out, things like communication, I think is the big one across the panels, communicating across disciplines, across different kinds of people, even if they work within the same organization, analysis and argument, the ability to express yourself clearly. But one thing I was thinking was interesting is that those kinds of skills are the things that as English students or teachers, we associate with analyzing literature, with literary criticism. But I think something else that has been sort of implicit in lots of these discussions is that there are things we can learn directly from literature itself that are useful, amazingly useful in a wide range of careers. And we touched on that a little bit in this session, talking about empathy and understanding of other people. So it's not just the transferable skills of reading and analyzing and writing arguments. It's also the things that we learn from the literature that we study, even if at the time it might seem very remote and strange and so on. I think it's full of transferable knowledge and skill.
And then, I mean, my colleagues have chosen lots of good things to talk about, but I think the thing I'd like to kind of draw out is that it's never really too late, because I think this is maybe the thing that's used to scare students at their different stages, when you're choosing your GCSEs, when you're choosing your A-levels. Each time it feels like, you've got to make this really important decision for the rest of your life, is how it sort of might come across when you're that age. But actually, you can't really, not that you can't muck things up, but it's really unlikely going to muck things up in the way that you might fear. Like, these things are actually kind of opportunities, and so long, you can find different careers, like Liam was saying, he's still using creative and interest in creative approaches, translating kind of skills, empathy, all these skills that are important from our kind of degree in corporate world. But you might not necessarily know what job you're going to be doing as a 16-year-old, and you don't have to. This also goes with the question about doing the PhD. Ditto, like you're not going to muck things up by being further educated. It might feel like you're sort of funneling yourself along a certain way, but it's, you know, it's just an additional loads of skills that you're adding. Yeah, so don't worry. That's all. But you know, we're in a time when we're being encouraged to worry a lot, and that we should be making more sensible decisions because we're competing with each other for jobs and work and money. And actually, I think what this has demonstrated is that you're endless creative ways through a career. It's more about framing it, actually, about selling what your experience is and your interests, that little bit of personality that Alex was saying. You know, it might feel safer to try and find a form online and like, how do I write this cover letter, but actually you need a little bit of sprinkling of yourself in there. So yeah, have confidence that you're gonna, you know, that's gonna come through at a later point. Right.
I'm also going to chip in and have another one, which is about being kind to yourself, and that was coming up through the panel of and previous panels about not comparing yourself to what's going on social media, and not comparing yourself back to a parent's generation where there seems to be a different kind of template for a career, sort of talking down the imposter inside you and believing, as Liam was saying, you belong in that room. So yeah, remembering to be kind to yourself, and yes, and not beating yourself up because you didn't use the career service in sort of years 2 and 3 of your undergraduate degree. Becky, should I just hand over to you just to say goodbye to everybody?
Sure, yeah, thank you. I will just finish by saying a big thank you to everyone from the English Association. Something we're working to do is to help teachers and young people know all these narratives about where you can go with studying English in your life, you know, and all the wonderful things it opens up to you. So thank you for sharing even more of these stories with us and being so generous with your time and your personal histories. So I will be in touch with all of you to let you know when this recording is available on our website, so you can take a look at that and the other resources that the project team has collected. And I'll just finish off by saying a big thank you to the organisers for pulling all this together and bringing us here today. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, yeah, to everybody, to speakers and to audiences, and yeah, and to Becky for hosting and collaborating on this. So take care, everybody, and yeah, I really hope people have found it useful, and drop back in, even if you don't want to listen to it again. Check out some of the resources that we'll make available. Okay, bye everybody.
Bye everyone.